Okay, so I have heard all of the complaints about my mic, so today I'm going to go full ASMR voice the entire podcast. All right, listen, we got an
Please don't.
we got an interesting show for you all today. A lot of things going on. Now, I'm going to repeat a phrase that I have heard so many times. In fact, ever since I got into politics, it became like this common thing all the time. You'd show up to a meeting, and inevitably, the guy hosting the meeting or the elected official would get up and be like, "This is the most important election of our lifetime." And I always thought it was just lame. I really did. I thought it was just ridiculous because not every single election can be the most important of our lifetime. But as you look around the world, what's been going on? You look at union strikes shutting down ports all over the country. You look at missile strikes in the Middle East. You look at what's been going on with the economy, what's been going on with inflation, what's going on with immigration. I think it's actually fair to say that this might be at least one of, if not the most important election within my lifetime. So I'm 45. And so the vice presidential debate matters. Now, obviously, we all recognize that the vice president doesn't have a great deal of power and authority in and of themselves, but they do have a great deal of influence. And in many respects, it could be auditioning for the top job at some point. And so understanding who the respective parties have picked to fill that position is important. And so today what we're going to go through is we're going to go through kind of a litany of things that are taking place this week because it has been a busy week. So we're going to talk about the union strikes. We're going to talk about the flooding in North Carolina. We're going to talk about the missile strikes over in the Middle East and what's going on in Lebanon. And we're going to do all of that right before we go into the vice presidential debate because I want us to sit there and analyze some of the comments that were made, the performances that we're giving, some of the funny things that took place, some of the serious things that took place, and some of the analysis that just blows my mind. There was one article in particular that I'm going to tell you right now, I cannot wait to mock relentlessly. And so all of that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument. I am your host, Nick Freitas. With me in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
And then, of course, we have our resident historian and political prognosticator, also known on Twitter and YouTube as the Oracle of Virginia, but not the weird drugged out Oracle in Delphi. This one's he's mostly sober. Christian, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Good. Okay, so let's kind of jump in and kind of like, again, defining our terms of what we're going to talk about. We got a lot of issues to cover. We're going to try to go through a lot of them. We definitely want to be responsive to all of your questions because when you go through this many issues at once, people got questions. And so we're going to try to dedicate a lot of time in this episode to answering them. We're going to try to keep up with them. So all three of us are trying to watch as we're also pulling up articles and things like that. And so insofar as, it's in there, if you type in questions, semicolon, or you do a super chat, that makes it really easy for us to find. If you just kind of ask a random question, it's a lot more difficult for us to find. So just going to put that out there. But before we get to that, I think it's really important that all of us understand something, right? It's not just one of the famous Thomas Sowell quotes that we say all the time around here is that the reason why or the fact that so many politicians are shameless liars is not just a reflection on them. It's also a reflection on the voting public. And the question is, how do we make more informed voters? Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It starts with the kids. It starts with educating kids to actually understand what our constitutional republic actually is, what our system of government is, how they can effectively navigate it. And not just that, but also understanding certain philosophical, moral, economic principles. And I cannot think of a better way to do that than with the Tuttle Twins, right? So for those of you who don't know, I may or may not be the voice actor for George Washington in season 3. You're welcome. And they have a great deal going on right now. So if you use our promo code, right, you can go to the link in the description. If you want your kids to actually have not only a great cartoon series, but also a book series to go with it, where they're going to learn about a lot of really important principles, but learn about it in like an actual entertaining way. And I can speak to this because my own kids have read the books. I've watched the cartoons because one of the things I look for in a cartoon is it's something that the parent will want to watch with the kids, because I think now more than ever, it's important that you don't just put on cartoons for your kids and hope they're not going to do something crazy, right? So these ones actually are. They're actually really funny. So there's humor in there that is accessible for kids, also accessible for adults. You're going to see the same thing within the books. They're really, really easy to read. 66% off season 1 book series, right? If you go in right now, buy that. So I'm telling you, this is a great addition to your curriculum. If you're homeschooling, or if it's just something you want to augment. I cannot recommend Tuttle Twins enough. So go into the promo code, take that link, and give these guys a shot. That's all I'm going to say. Give them a shot. Because it really is well done. I know there's a lot of conservative content out there that we kind of look at where it's like, oh, I'm watching this to be supportive, right? That's not what this is. This actually is incredibly well done, very informative. I know my kids learned a lot. Nothing is greater than watching your kids debate for something in a setting where you're not helping them, you're not the one, and watching them to be able to navigate a conversation and to do it in a calm, cool, collected manner in a way that is intellectually rigorous. Nothing gives you a better sense of accomplishment as a parent than to watch your kids defend values because they're not just yours, they're now theirs, and they believe in them. Tuttle Twins will help you do that as a parent. So check this series out. Go into the promo code. Great series. Cannot say enough nice things about them. Okay. Let's go ahead and jump into it. The first thing that we're going to actually talk about today is not the debate. You're going to have to wait for that because we want to talk about all the circumstances going on within the country right now, all the events going on in the country right now that actually makes the VP debate important. And the first one that I want to address here has to do with the union strikes, the Longshoreman strikes that we're seeing take place all over the country. And the question I want to ask, because look, people take a lot of different sides with unions. So I'm going to give you my bias right up front before we get into this, because we've actually done some content in the past. Christian's done some content in the past about the concept of unions and specifically the ports system and some of the rules that we have there. My position with unions has always been this. I don't have a problem with laborers getting together and forming voluntary associations to where they feel they can better advocate for their interests working within a company or an industry or whatever it is. But I think it's important to understand that a business is not collectively owned, right? It's not collectively owned in the sense that simply because you work for the business, you own part of the business. That's not how that works. Now, some businesses do operate that way. They give employee shares and things like that, and there's a whole process, and that's fine if you want to set something up that way. But one of the things I know I always told my kids as they were going out and looking for a job is you own your labor. You don't own the job. The job is actually owned by the person that created the opportunity. And so it's important to understand who owns what. So I do not buy into this idea when a union says that, like, well, no, these are our jobs. No, they're jobs that you do. You own your labor. And if somebody is not treating you right, I think it's perfectly fine for you to try to organize and to try to advocate, for yourself or for the workers. Or if you don't like the job, I think it's perfectly acceptable to leave, right? Nobody should be able to force you to work for them. By the same token, you also have to respect the property rights of the people who built the company, right? And sometimes there's this confusion about, well, who builds the company? Is it the employees? Is it the employer? Is it the investors? Who is it? Well, it's kind of a combination of factors, but ultimately, let me put it this way. If I hire you to do a job for me and then you do the job, you don't have ownership of, like, let's say I hire you to paint a picture for me and we sit down and we agree and I tell you what I want in the picture and I've seen your artwork before and I really like it, and then you paint it for me. And then I pay you and you give me the artwork and you come back later and say, you know what, I actually should own part of that artwork. Why? Well, my labor made it possible. Okay, that's true, but you didn't give me your labor for free. I had to pay you for it. And we agreed on what the transaction was. So again, I think it's important when we're talking about labor, when we're talking about capital, when we're talking about businesses, that both sides have legitimate interests and stakes. So I don't like it when the government comes in and tips the scale in favor of one side or the other. I don't want the government coming in and telling or like giving businesses special privileges, especially in competition with other businesses. I like a free and open market, right? I don't like cronyism. By the same token, I don't like government coming in and taking the side of a union. I think that free people should be able to negotiate their own contracts. And what that sometimes means is that if an employer believes that he can replace that labor force with somebody else, they have a right to do so, because ultimately it is their property or it's the property of the shareholders. And so that's where I'm coming from. That's the arrangement that's always made sense to me. So it's not that I'm necessarily anti-union. I'm anti-government coming in and tipping the scales on anyone's behalf. Now, having said that, when you look at the sort of agreements that we have at a lot of our ports, that's exactly what's happened. The government has actually come in and they've either adopted legislation or they've set up rules and regulations which really prevents not only competition, but actually prevents a lot of incredibly necessary automation. And the current argument that's being made right now, it's not that the Longshoremen's union are striking simply because they want higher pay, right? I think the base right now is something like, I forget what it is. I think it's like in the 30s, like $38 an hour, something like that's the base. They're arguing for a base that goes into the 80s, right? They're arguing for a base that goes in the 80s. And they're also saying that as a condition of them coming back to work, they want to drastically limit the amount of automation that you can do. And just so you know that this is not me, coming up with this, we have a couple articles here. And the first one that we have actually, comes right out. The ILA strike seeks increased wages and curbs in automation. We're going to show a video here that we actually did 2 years ago talking about what was actually going on with respect to automation. And it was actually a Y-minute that Christian and I put together. And I think it will blow your mind. I think it will blow your mind how ports are automated in other countries, especially in the Netherlands and in China versus how they're done here. There's another article here. Let's go and bring up this next one as well, because I think this one actually does a lot to do. East Coast dock workers threaten strike over wages and automation concerns. And then go ahead and scroll down. This one was a little old. It says a massive strike is looming at ports along the East Coast as dock workers threaten to walk off the job Tuesday if their demands for higher wages and a ban on automated crane, gates, and container movements are not met. This is also the part that I have a real problem with, right? It is one thing for people to say, I want to get paid more for what I do because I think I'm not fairly compensated, right? And then an employer has to ask themselves the question, like, okay, do I lose more money by having to train an entirely new labor force, or is it just easier and more economical to say, okay, yeah, we're gonna increase your pay or benefits, right? Like that's a fair negotiation between two parties. When you actually have workers coming in and saying you're not allowed to use advances in technology and automation in order to make this more efficient, that's far more problematic. Now, a lot of people are coming in and saying, well, Nick, this is the problem, right? If you over automate, then where do all the jobs go? I realize that there's always difficulty in there, especially with transition, especially when certain jobs become they become uneconomical within your economy. The question I would ask people, though, is that if you're going to say, they keep saying I need more volume, by the way. If you're going to say that automation is the problem, I got to ask you a question. Do you ride a car? Do you use a phone? Is all the food that you go to the store and buy, is it only done by horse and plow? Like all of that was automation. Like all of the advances that is created by historical standards, an immense amount of abundance and prosperity has been a result of technological advancement combined with property rights. And inevitably what ends up happening is look, it is fair to say that when Henry Ford established the assembly line and all of a sudden cars started to become more affordable for poorer people, for middle class people, that had a negative impact on the horse industry and all the other industries associated with maintaining horses or building wagons or doing all of those other things. But there was a whole new industry, there was a whole series of new industries that were also created based off of transportation, mechanics, fixing the cars, the tires associated with them, the plants needed in order to build them. And so I think what's important to understand is that anybody that is trying to tell you one way or the other that there's no pain in transition, or that that automation is the real problem because we need more jobs, both sides are failing to understand something. It is perfectly acceptable to say, yes, somebody that has worked in a particular field for a long period of time and has become kind of dependent upon that field, there's pain associated with automation that may replace a portion of their job or maybe the entirety of their job. By the same token, other opportunities are now created when that labor can now be redirected to something else in the economy that needs it more. And so we really, really need to understand. We really need to understand that what we're talking about here is trade-offs. There's always going to be a trade-off. And the trade-off is not between the laborer or the machine, right? If you're going to artificially increase prices and prevent innovation, here's what you're actually doing. You're saying in order to protect these jobs, we're going to tell every single American that relies on these products and services that they have to pay more, that they have to be made poorer in order to support these jobs. And I think it's fair to say that there's a better way to address that problem. There's a better way to address the problems associated with technological innovation and integration of automation and things like that than to just forever ban automation.
Somebody in the chat said, "Let's automate Congress." You know what?
I mean, AI could probably do a lot better job.
Depends who writes the code.
Well, yeah, that's a. I would not trust anything written by the CCP to. But you know what this reminds me so much of?
Yeah.
Especially the ban on automation segment of the demands coming from the Longshoremen is the Luddite movement in Northern England in the early 1800s. So you had textile workers, right? You know, like cloth weavers and stuff like that felt like that they were being put out of business or that they were being paid less because textile mills started to pop up in England in the early 1800s. And their response was go and burn down the textile mills.
Yeah.
And obviously, spoiler alert, that did not end well for anybody. And in the long run, the Luddites lost, obviously. But to the benefit, is certainly in the long term for the entire world, certainly the general public in the United Kingdom. And this includes the lower and middle classes in the UK, because suddenly clothing, which historically was a very, very expensive item to get a hold of because everything had to be made by hand.
Yeah.
Clothing became very cheap. And now you can have nice, good quality clothing. Obviously, there's crappy quality out there as well, but you can now have good quality clothing affordable to even middle class or lower class individuals. Whereas historically, if you this shirt that I'm wearing here, this buttoned up whatever you call it, it's not really the shirt. Tina, I'm a guy.
Flannel.
What do you call this?
That would be a flannel.
Okay, anyway.
Will somebody marry this guy, please?
For the audio listeners, look, I'm a guy. I have no fashion sense. You know, this flannel, if I was to buy this 200 years ago, I would need to be very wealthy to afford something like this. But today, I could be me and afford something like this. And it's in large part because of automation.
Yeah.
And so, like, when people look at this and they might sympathize with the union element or they might sympathize with the striking element, what they have to realize is that these actions are not just to the benefit of the longshoremen, they're to the detriment of the entire country.
Yeah.
Because anybody that wants to buy anything that's being shipped in, and I know that there's some people that are like, well, why do we have these jobs overseas? Why do we need to ship goods in? Because fair point on some things, but inevitably there's going to be something that we want that is going to be shipped in. We're not an autarky, and we never will be. There will always be at least something that will be shipped in. And for people to demand things like no cranes, no gates, no automation of anything, and I'm going to hold the entire port system hostage until I get my demands, that's extortion at this point. And it's extortion that's going to be hurting poor people in this country and middle-class people in this country. Not just wealthy people, not just corporations, but like ordinary Americans.
Well, and I think it's important to understand, too, that if you look at, when you look at overall unionization in the United States, I think this is interesting. Only 6.9% of the private sector is unionized. 36% of the public sector is unionized. You know who is rabidly against public sector unionization? FDR. I mean, one of the godfathers of progressive politics was against it because he saw some major problems, and we can get into that. That's probably an argument for a different episode. But the important thing to understand is that, again, my problem is not with the idea of people engaging in voluntary association. My problem is with the idea of the government using its power to then come in and say, we're going to negotiate on your behalf. And because what it does is it ends up being an inherent violation of private property rights. And that's a huge problem. And so you have some of these states, and especially when you look at some of these ports. In fact, do we have that? Can you bring that Y-Minutes video up that we did on the ports? I think I put it in the outline. I want to show this.
Supply chain one?
Yeah, this is the.
Look at your beard in this. Maybe we need to go back to that.
Oh, really?
You guys, look at this glorious beard.
Wow, I haven't seen Tina this
well,
excited
if you
about
remember,
scruffy beard.
I'm sorry for skipping ahead to the debate, but if you remember, apparently J.D. Vance's Am I not allowed to review?
You're
No,
not-
can't do
no.
that
I was
yet.
so close to
Oh
crossing
my
the
gosh,
line.
you're
dare.
so
I didn't even know
close.
that's in our outline.
Yes, it's in
okay.
our outline.
Yeah, you
All
should-
right,
you
the
should try
audience is
reading
going to
the
have
outline.
to.
Roll it back there,
Okay,
sir.
so
Roll it back.
I want to talk about this is something we did 2 years ago on why the supply chain crisis was completely predictable. And so understand this was written, shortly after kind of the worst of COVID and lockdowns and problems and things not being on shelves. And the argument that we were trying to make was everybody was pointing to an international crisis, i.e. COVID, and saying this explains the supply chain crisis. And the argument we were making is like, no, this has actually been exacerbated by some of the rules and laws that have been put in place, and how this is not just the company or the union. This is the government coming in and picking favorites.
Yeah,
So
but before we hit play on that, like everybody is talking about how, majestic your beard is. You guys, just quick poll right now in the chats. Please tell us, should he grow the beard longer like that, or should he keep it short and trim tidy like this? Just, think about that while you're watching this great video.
Okay.
So you want to play the whole thing?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
it's 3 minutes, so it's
Okay.
not long. Let's go ahead.
Well, the government has officially informed us that Christmas may be in trouble this year. Unless, of course, Santa is able to pick up the slack for our broken supply chain system. And the response to the supply chain crisis has been interesting to say the least, with everything from people blaming the pandemic to claiming that this is actually a sign of prosperity. And my personal favorite, one opinion writer at the Washington Post telling us all that we should just suck it up and lower our expectations. And yes, it's perfectly reasonable to point out that during a global pandemic, supply chains are going to suffer as a result. But the pandemic has also been revealing some real problems that predate COVID. For instance, if you were to guess, where do you think a U.S. port like Los Angeles ranks in the world with respect to efficiency? Top 5? How about the top 10? Actually, we don't have a single port in the U.S. that ranks in the top 50. And when it comes to the port in Los Angeles, it doesn't even rank in the top 300. And that can't be blamed on the pandemic. So what is it? Turns out there's a number of federal and state regulations that have put U.S. ports at a competitive disadvantage. For example, U.S. ports are open for fewer hours per week than many other ports around the world. Most Asian ports are open 24/7, while the ports in Los Angeles and Long Beach, they're only open around 16 hours a day. And much of this is the result of government-backed labor contracts, which explicitly limit the number of hours that American ports can remain open. Most of these union contracts don't just affect the labor hours, they drastically increase shipping costs by stifling much-needed modernization efforts in American ports. Ports in places like Europe and Asia have actually automated a lot of the process with respect to uploading shipping containers. So much so, the automated port in Rotterdam is about 80% more productive than the port of Oakland in California. And yet, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union continues to fight tooth and nail to prevent American ports from adopting the same technology that has made Japanese and European ports some of the most efficient in the world. Now, why would they do that? Well, in the words of one union official, those robots represent hundreds of lost union jobs. Now, time and again, we've seen how government works with certain industries in order to hold back new technologies or modernization efforts. Why do they do it? Well, it's to protect well-entrenched special interests that quite frankly have far better lobbyists than you and are dedicated to the status quo and terrified of change. After all, can you imagine what other industries like the internet or telecommunications would look like under the stress of such government regulations without the creative forces and innovation of the marketplace? In fact, one famous inventor predicted nearly 100 years ago that it would be innovation and creativity which would produce a world where we can communicate with each other instantly over large distances. And if you want to learn more about that prediction, you can click here.
So
Tesla was a genius, I do have to say.
yeah, he was. Again, what I've always found interesting about that was the fact that, again, 2 years ago we were talking about this union, these ports, and I think, I mean, you did a great job talking about this, where we laid out the argument that, look, let's say you do want to do more to help the jobs at these various ports. Okay, theoretically, let's say we're going to compromise. What if you kept them over 24 hours, and so now you have more shifts, but now we automate it, and so we can do a whole lot more, and it's better for the economy. Like, that would be something where even though I am an adamant free market guy and I don't want this sort of, monopolized control over port work and stuff like that, if we had to do something like, I would look at that and be like, okay, look, here's the deal. you're going to get more shifts, so it's not like we're going to lay off everybody, but we have to have greater automation in order to compete. I don't think that's bad. I do have to list off one quote here. Jonathan said, "Grow your dang beard, Yahweh will be pleased."
That's pretty much the consensus, is everybody likes long beard. Well, there are a few that say shave it clean and others that say keep it trimmed, but the vast majority is saying let it grow.
There's a couple of the things. I don't think we're going to play this video, but I do also want to point something out here, because obviously there's a lot of people, like I've known a lot of people that have been members of unions and have worked in this. And look, a union is like anything else. There's really good, hardworking people in there, and then there's not good, hardworking people in unions. There's people that exploit it or whatnot. But
yeah, those are usually the bosses.
If you look at the bosses, like what is it, Duggart? This guy came right out and said, "We're going to cripple you," and in part, he understands.
Are you going to play the clip?
I want to look at this. So, union boss, go ahead and hit play.
Well, it's 15 minutes.
We're not going to do all 15 minutes. Okay. He says it pretty.
In today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you.
On today's episode of What's Going On.
Yeah. So again, here's what needs to be understood about this.
Wow.
The reason he can do that, right? Union boss who threatened to cripple economy lives in a luxurious 7,000 square foot mansion. He also drives a Bentley.
He was wearing actually in that clip, he's wearing like a $10,000 gold chain, and his glasses are like $1,500, $2,000. So
the important part is this: why do they have this much power? Right? There are very few areas where anybody can come in and say, "I'm going to go on strike and we'll cripple you," because you'd be able to bring in other people. You'd be able to bring in other people to do the work. You'd have alternatives. It's because the government has allowed them to negotiate contracts that give them a certain degree of monopolization. And whenever you have that sort of monopoly power, it's corrupting. And when you have an economy right now, and think about the timing of this, right? It's not like something magical happened within the last couple of months. You have an election year, you have a bad economy, and then, and I don't know if this factored in, but you also have a massive hurricane that is already causing supply chain issues in and of themselves. And so if you're looking at this from a negotiating standpoint, when he says, "I can cripple you," the only reason he can do that is because of the government contracts that he has. If he didn't have those, or if there was more market competition, he might be able to say, "I can cripple you for one port, maybe a couple," but to theoretically be able to shut down massive ports all over the country, that just wouldn't exist.
And now, just to clarify, there's a reason why new people can't be hired to cross this picket line, right?
So there's a couple of points on that, because
Christian mentioned what Reagan did with
with the air traffic controllers is a little bit different, right? Because there was like a national security component to that, to where Reagan said, "I'll just fire all of you and replace you," and he meant it, and the union fought back, and Reagan kept his promise. And in fact, people were telling the union boss at that time, it's like, "Look, you can like Reagan, you can hate Reagan, you can compromise with Reagan, but if you don't believe Reagan will actually do it, you're wrong." And he did it. And Margaret Thatcher actually did the same thing with certain unions in the UK. It's also important to understand that I don't know how true it is today. I think it's more true with the public sector unions. There used to be, especially if you look at the unions in the UK with Corbyn and whatnot, there was very much a Marxist undertone to some of those unions at that time. I don't think you can safely say that about like unions in the United States today, maybe with some exceptions. I think the vast majority of union workers would find communism.
There definitely was in Spain. CNT was like its own military force during the Civil War.
But that's what I'm saying.
These
like,
guys operate like mob bosses. You had a tweet that went out yesterday that was very, very good, and you likened them to mob bosses, and that they've always been like that too.
Yeah. Well, so Jesse Cubbage said, question, are union jobs the same as jobs? More union jobs equals more union dues, not just jobs for workers. No, that's true. There's also a reason why you will see negotiations for jobs where the reason why they don't want the automation is because it then requires more human labor. And some people might look at that, well, isn't that a good thing? Well, okay, let's use an example that Milton Friedman used. He actually went over to China, and he was talking to the Chinese government, and they had this massive infrastructure project that was going on, and they had like literally like hundreds of workers out there with shovels. And he said, and they were looking at Milton Friedman going like, what do you think of this job? And he goes, well, why would you use shovels for this? Why wouldn't you bring in heavy equipment? And the government bureaucrat looked at Milton Friedman and said, well, no, you don't understand, Mr. Friedman. This is a jobs program. He goes, oh, in that case, take away the shovels. Right? Because if all you want is more people doing work, right? Well, then, okay, take away their shovels. You're going to need 4 times as many people to do the same amount of work if you take away the shovels, right? Are we wealthier now? Are we better off now as a result? The answer is no. Economic advancement and prosperity doesn't come from just more jobs. If that means make work projects, or you're having people do things that don't need to be done or can be done far more efficiently. Economic advancement comes when you're actually getting labor into positions where they choose to go, right? Like they choose to go based off of their own needs, wants, desires, and talents. And you're putting them into places where it's actually needed by consumers. But if you're just creating jobs because the more union jobs you get, the more union dues you get, and then you take a portion of those dues and you give them to politicians that then will carve out and give you protection from competition, well then I would hope that we could all see the perverse incentives associated with that, regardless of how you might feel conceptually about an individual union laborer or an individual union. Right? There's no question that provides a really, really dangerous perverse incentive, because now what's happening is, and this is why there's a problem with public sector unions, because they're not actually negotiating with the people that are paying them. They're negotiating with the politicians they help get elected, who are not paying them with their money. They're paying them with tax dollars. And so this just kind of, I hope this kind of illustrates, again, I'm not sitting here saying like,
it's just basically a way to launder donation money, to basically spend your tax dollars to buy votes, and then those votes that they bought come back to you in the form of donations. It's just this big old scheme that especially the left has learned how to use, but some on the right as well. But yeah, that's the point, is that jobs exist because there's work that must get done. Mm-hmm. Well, when you're the person that needs the work done, you're going to try to find the most efficient, most accurate, cheapest way to get that done. And that could be people doing the job, or that could be automation. And this idea that we don't need automation or shouldn't have automation because these people will lose jobs. Unfortunately, guys, jobs don't exist just to employ people. Jobs exist to get a job done, to get work done. And if you aren't getting the work done as efficiently, as fast, and you're more expensive, then you should not be surprised that the job's going to go away. It's going to be given to a machine, and the machine's going to do it better, cheaper, and bitch a lot less about it.
All right, Life in a Nutshell said, he goes, but you have to admit automation results in fewer net jobs. I don't know that I actually, here's why I don't actually believe that. In 1800, we had very, very little automation across the world, and we had about 1 billion people, and about 80% of them were living in poverty. By the end of the 2000, or by 2000, year 2000, we had close to 8 billion people. We had a ton more automation, and we had less than 20% of the world population living in poverty. And so those two things shouldn't work, right? If you have limited resources plus more automation, well, then the theory would be is if you have massive population growth, then wouldn't you have net fewer jobs? And that's not what we found. And the reason for that is this. It turns out human desires are pretty much infinite, right? Like there's always something more to want, and a lot of times we can look at that, and there's an unhealthy component to that, right? It is unhealthy to want something greedily or whatnot, but it's not unhealthy to want things that actually make your life better, right? It's not unhealthy to want things that make it easier for you to communicate, easier for you to work, easier for you to have fun, whatever it is, clothe yourself, feed yourself, house yourself. And so it's not that it leads to net fewer jobs. What it usually does is it leads to net fewer jobs within an area or a realm, which can now be done through automation. And in some cases, the other thing too to understand within the United States is that there are certain jobs that are no longer done in the U.S., they're done overseas. And the reason why they're done overseas is because a foreign economy might be at a level of advancement to where it makes perfect sense to make $2 a day doing textiles. Nobody is going to do that job in the United States, not because we've banned it, but because there's a lot of other options that are far better than that. And so it doesn't make sense to deny a foreign economy the ability to provide a good or service that we actually want at a much cheaper cost. It makes more sense for us in a more advanced economy to really push our children and our workforce into those more advanced jobs, because ultimately that's far better for them. And that's what you actually call in economics competitive advantage. If you are much better at cooking and I am much better at fixing cars, well, then I should be the mechanic and you should be the cook. Nobody has to direct us to do that. Now, as a cook, you could say, well, gosh, if I don't have electricity and I got to operate off of candles and I need a lot more people to help me, is that better? Well, no, not necessarily. It's probably better. You want tools to make your job more efficient and more effective. This is one of the other issues too when we talk about the negotiation between labor and business. You will see a lot of people on the left, and especially Marxists and socialists, say that the capitalist or the employer is exploiting the laborer because they keep a portion of what the laborer produces. And the reason why this is not a good way to look at it, in my opinion, is because if that's what's really going on, if the person, like I worked at a pizza joint when I was in high school, I worked at a pizza joint. So if the big evil pizza joint was exploiting my labor because I didn't get, quote, the full value of my labor, well, then here's my question. Why didn't I just go and compete with the pizza joint? Well, it's because they had a restaurant and they had an established customer base and they had an advertising and they had a lot more capital equipment. All of those things were achieved through prior labor. Right? All of those things were achieved by them actually working and investing and building these things. And here's what ended up happening. I could try to compete with them by making pizzas out of my kitchen, but they would have actually paid me more to make pizzas for them than I would have made making pizzas for myself and for other people to sell it. So was I exploiting them? No. I was making use. I was getting the most money I possibly could for my labor at that time by making use of all of the investments and infrastructure they had built. Right? And then they were making money also by my labor. And so we had a voluntary exchange that was taking place. Now, if I didn't like it or another pizza place wanted to pay me more, I could leave. Right? But I didn't have a right to tell the pizza place, no, you must do X, Y, and Z. They built that. I didn't. Right? I was now helping to do it, but I was only helping to do it because I got paid. So I think we should stop seeing it as a purely, is there some competition between employee and employer? Sure. Because the employee wants to make the most money they can for the least amount of work possible. The employer wants to get the most amount of work they can or value they can for the least cost possible. And so you negotiate and you find a compromise that both of you like. And then ideally what happens is labor does a very good job for their employer, and employer takes care of their labor by treating them well because both of them benefit when they're cooperative. So there's a competitive component to it, but there's also a cooperative component.
I wanted to highlight a comment real quick. Jeffrey DeBrito, I think, said, no, Nick, automation results in fewer jobs for the current older working generations. It also results in more jobs for subsequent generations.
I can see how that would play out in certain fields, but I don't think that's an absolute. Like, I don't think we can say that A plus B equals C. I think you could certainly point to a lot of things where automation actually allows older people to continue to do a job that they certainly wouldn't be able to do if it still required physical labor.
Well, and you're going to automate at some point. So do we wait until this newer generation is now the older generation? And like, when do you do the automation? Because it's going to happen eventually down the road, unless, of course, they get what they want and they get a total ban on automation and we basically regress 50 years.
Yeah. The bottom line is automation, the only way that you can really prevent automation ultimately is through essentially government oppression. That's the only way you can do it, because naturally it will happen, because people, we like to invent, we like to innovate, we like to make things easy for ourselves, we like to do all these things.
Imagine being against innovation.
Yeah.
Innovation's good. Now, progressives, liberals like to talk about progressive, making progress, progressive, even though they are the ones that tend to be on the side of holding back certain innovations like this and holding back people's skill levels and trying to bring everybody down to the same level across the board. So they're not very progressive in that way.
No.
They're more I would say not progressive, more destructive.
Yeah, I think we had let me see. I think we had a couple super chats here. I want to make sure I get to those. Torino, thank you for the super chat. It says, doesn't help the companies who automatize, I'm probably reading that wrong, are demonized. So the ones who automate are demonized and portrayed as greedy in TV shows and such, providing cheaper products as a bad thing. No, I agree with you. In fact, you'll see this in a lot of cartoons. I remember watching a cartoon with my daughters once when they were little. We were watching something with Barbie, and it was amazing how anybody that was coming to set up like a company or whatnot, they were the bad, evil guys that were going to mow over the beautiful forest or the park. And I remember sitting there with my kids going, so what about all the people that needed the goods and services? Or what about all the people that were actually going to finally be able to feed themselves and get a job? Or what about, and I would have these conversations with my kids, and sometimes they'd be like, okay, Daddy, we get it. Can we finish watching Barbie? And I was like, no, not until we actually understand this point. But no, you're right. There is this popular conception that it's, or there's this really popular narrative within media, and maybe we should start asking ourselves why Hollywood seems to be aligned in such a way. But they do. They try to demonize companies that automate as if they're some sort, evil and bad. Thank you for the super chat. Another super chat we got here from Joe.
Hold on, I wanted to highlight one real quick.
Oh, okay.
One of my favorites, Willy Wonka. The father worked at a toothpaste factory, turning the lids onto the toothpaste, and that was his whole job. And then they automated. They were all upset because he lost his job, and that's where everything kicked off. But when they wrapped up the story, they said, oh, he actually got a job fixing the machine that turns the knobs. And so there's always going to be something you can still do, because new jobs are created when new products are created in order to do those jobs. So, obviously the era of people going into a career field and staying there their entire life is kind of over. We don't do that anymore most of the time.
It's difficult.
People do different jobs. In fact, you work 20 years at a job, now you're at retirement. Well, you still have a lot of years ahead of you. You could get 3 different retirements in your life now.
Yeah.
This is slightly off topic, but I don't really know if that's entirely a good thing.
What, not being able to work in one job for your whole life?
The era of you having a career being over, and that people job hop now from company to company.
I don't think that's bad.
I think there's a difference between.
I think there's a subtle dark side to it.
Well, I think there's a difference.
I'm sure there's a dark side to everything, though.
There's a difference between having a career and working for the same company for like 20 to 40 years. I certainly think some people like that, and that I think it's still possible. I don't think it's as possible as it used to be, but I appreciate your point. Like there used to be a certain degree of stability found in that, maybe even a nobility associated with it as well, to kind of like do your time at the company and the whole deal.
Well, and also like finding meaning and purpose and taking pride and helping to build something rather than just being a mercenary, because you have to be a mercenary nowadays as an employer, or sorry, as an employee. Like everybody tells you, and I remember in my 20s, everybody was always telling me like, you need to change jobs every 2 to 3 years if you want to maximize the amount of money that you can possibly earn, and you need to do that because how else are you going to be able to afford a house? And then it finally just started hitting me in my late 20s that like the way that it existed for my parents or my grandparents, where you had a career in a field, in an industry, and you took pride in working for that company for 40 years, and they took care of you and you took care of them, and it was a mutually beneficial relationship. I feel like that there was, metaphysically, I just feel like that there's more meaning to be found in that rather than just being a mercenary because you have to be. And so like that's what I mean by there's a subtle dark side to it.
I don't know. I think that more options creates more jobs. The free market creates more options for people. People decide. People make choices that take them a different route. By the way, Nick, you have a stink bug behind you.
Yeah, the stink bug is back. It's on your chair,
it's on
right
the head
behind
of your
you.
Yeah, people are probably watching it crawling
He's
around.
returned from Tuesday's podcast where he was on my laptop.
We're in Virginia, and it's
that
stink
time of
bug
year.
season, and they're all coming inside trying to find a place to hibernate for the
And
winter.
it's also been raining for like 4.
But I think that anytime you have a lot more options in the economy, a lot more progress in the economy, that tends to be a good thing, and that's one of the reasons people move around. People used to stay in one place and be fine with their really, really basic, I'm just going to make this amount of money and I'm invested in this company. And I get that there's something valuable in that. But it ends up holding you in the same place forever. Like people change their minds. They want to do something different, and a lot of people feel trapped in whatever job they're in that kind of an environment. And the fact that there are a lot more options now, I think, is actually net a good thing.
I do as well. Look, I still think there's still companies that you can do that with, right? There's still companies you can achieve like a 40-year career with them. And it can be a robust career that allows for advancement and promotion and all the things that you like. I think it's also important to understand that I think all of us have, there's kind of three components, right? You got the entrepreneurial spirit, you got the managerial spirit, and you got like the artisan or the technician. And I think all of us have components of that to some degree. I actually think our economy now allows for a lot more entrepreneurship than previously exists, or at least makes it more accessible in some ways and less accessible in others. In fact, what I find interesting is that the more the government tries to provide that kind of security within a particular job or a field, the more they actually, I think, shut down and hamper the entrepreneurial side, and I think that's problematic. One more super chat, and then we're going to switch over to our next topic here. Joe said, I know you said you don't want to run for president because of the swamp, but you need to look at running like you did joining the military. After Donald Trump, no hope. Joe, I appreciate, I certainly appreciate the vote of confidence. Here's what I would say on that. Somebody had been very graciously said something similar a while back, and I was watching one of the comments, and somebody came up with a comment. He goes, we had a mayor we really liked, and then somebody kind of trumped up some charges against him, did a recall election, and on an off-year recall, they managed to get rid of this guy. And so he went on and he started to do a talk show, and he started to talk about policy, and he started to talk about candidates, and he started to talk about all these various things that he was interested in and he liked. And then all of a sudden, it came out that all the charges against the mayor were totally false. They were totally made up. He was completely exonerated, and everyone begged him to run for mayor again, and he goes, not a chance. It's not a chance.
Yeah, you guys made your choice.
He goes, I've had far more. He goes, I've gotten far more meaning and purpose out of doing this, and he goes, I think I've had far more of a positive effect. So I appreciate it. I don't see it in my future. Running for president is an incredibly difficult thing, and I think thankfully I do think there's some good people out there that could potentially fill that role and be better at it than me. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our next topic right there. I think we had some good conversation on that. And this has to do with the floods in North Carolina. One of the things that this always frustrates me. Why was Asheville?
The footage here is just terrible.
Yeah, the footage is. I'm going to list off some people that have been talking a lot about this that I trust, that are giving kind of like on the ground, like these guys are either helping people find out where to go in order to get assistance, where you can send supplies or they're on the ground, right? So two of them are actually on the ground, and I think one of them, he's in state, but he's in the military and active duty, so I don't think he can go there.
There are also reports right now of certain localities texting and broadcasting to people that they are not to go and help their neighbors, to wait and let them come. Like, if you want to help, give us the money. Like FEMA is telling them, give us the money, and we'll go help them. You don't help them. And I understand sort of what they're saying, because you're putting yourself in danger. Now they may have to rescue you or whatever it is. Argument. But that doesn't explain why they don't want you giving money or helping with supplies. And so that it's like the government wants itself to be the complete solution for everything.
Well, and we're going to get into some of the other issues with this, but like, for instance, one of the things that drives me nuts about this is, why was Asheville, North Carolina flooding so bad? Rare weather events and climate change is to blame. So let's go ahead and scroll down here, because I don't want to see this Tim Kaine ad. vote for Hung Cow. With Hurricane Helen finally out of the picture, the true extent of devastation and loss of life in Asheville, North Carolina has only become apparent, and it really has. At least 35 people are dead in Buncombe County, with 41 total across the western part of the state as of noon Monday. I can say I believe that number is actually increased for a while there. I was hearing reports, and I don't know how accurate this is, so please don't run out and start tweeting, but from what I heard, at one point there was over 100 dead and 300 missing at one point. Now maybe that's changed over time, but whenever you hear a hurricane hitting the East Coast, what do you think? You think Florida, right? You think maybe coastal North Carolina, maybe parts of coastal Virginia. You don't think Asheville in the in the Appalachian Mountains, or you don't think Asheville in the mountains of North Carolina, right? You don't think that. Why did this happen? This 100-year flood is no expression. The flood of 1916 in Asheville crested at 21 feet, a record that has now been smashed by Helen. It's partially due to a rare weather event, some bad luck, and potentially climate change. So you notice in the headline it was absolutely climate change, and now it's potentially climate change. Why was there so much rainfall in Asheville, North Carolina? Helen produced such a large amount of rainfall due in part to a predecessor event, small relative to a hurricane regions of heavy rainfall produced ahead of a hurricane. These rainfalls produced a band of deep tropical moisture, which when mixed with a hurricane caused significant rainfall. Those predecessor rainfalls hit western North Carolina on Wednesday and Thursday, and according to USA Today, 10 inches of rain fell in Asheville, 8 inches on Tyrone, and 6 inches in Bristol, Johnson, Tennessee.
That's a lot of rain.
Before Helen even reached the area. So you had this saturation in the ground and everything else. And again, Tina's been through
these are
two
all
floods.
wet regions already too.
Yeah.
It's not like they were dry lands. We out here in Virginia, North Carolina, like all along this area, we get most of our rain, most of our moisture through the summer.
Yeah.
And so they're already peaked at their moisture level, and you've got now sides of mountains just falling in, and just you have mud overflowing just coming at you. I watched videos of people just, the whole house just went.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, watching the waters rush through people's homes and things like that, it definitely brings back some memories. I went through 2 floods as a kid with having to be rescued by search and rescue and driven through water as the vehicle is sliding away. And
you had water coming into the truck, right?
I was sitting in water in a really big, like, Chevy, remember those big Chevy Blazers?
Yeah.
The big tall ones?
Yep.
I was in the back seat of that, sitting in water. That's how deep it was, and the truck was sliding. I just remember how terrifying that was, and I was only 7 the first time that happened, and we were separated from our parents. We didn't see them till the next day, so they didn't know if we were alive, and we didn't know if they were alive. And my parents somehow, like, got on somebody's boat, ripped the cover off of it, and managed to survive by getting into somebody else's boat.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the situation you've got going on in mass there.
Yeah.
And the amount of, they're always going to try to blame climate change. The left loves that. They love it anytime something happens.
Well, and let's keep something in mind. It is true. It is true that the globe does not does not maintain consistent climate over thousands of years, right? There's definitely, we've had ice ages, right? We'd have many ice ages. We've had all that, and that impacts the way that the weather reacts. That's not in dispute, right? Nobody's challenging that, right, left, or center. It's always this idea that no, it's all man-made global warming, and that's due industrialization, and that's why we have to, and that's why you have to do these big green energy boondoggles. That's why the same people that are apparently so terrified of climate change that they keep buying beachfront property and flying around in private jets while telling the rest of us we're not allowed to have too much AC are the same ones that stand up against, like, nuclear power and things like that. Which is why I always have a hard time with this. It is one thing to say that, as climate events happen or as things change, that's going to have an impact. Like, so for instance, in California, there's a cycle, right? There's a cycle with respect to rain and drought. We call it, there's El Nino, and it has to do with tide pattern, or not tide patterns. What am I thinking of? Anyways, ocean patterns and things of that, of hot air and cold air and currents and everything else. And look, I think it's a wonderful thing to study and understand, but every single time this is put out by the media, it's never let's have a level-headed conversation about what's actually going on and how we should prepare or whatnot. It's always, and this is why you should support the Green New Deal. And it's got to be so, and it's just so frustrating, because when we look at things like this,
well, it's so blatantly obvious at this point, which is why people have no longer started to pay, they've stopped paying attention to these type of people, because every time there's a natural disaster, you already know, you don't even need to listen to the messaging, because you already know what the messaging is going to be, right? It's going to be vote for the Democratic Party, or if you're in Germany, vote for the Greens, or vote for SDP, or if you're in the UK, vote for Labour. Like, it's just so consistently, blatantly obvious the amount of, like, political malpractice is at play here. But what's even more interesting is that this is not actually unique. This idea here, I want to go back to the top of this article, right? Rare weather events and climate change are to blame. And then they showed this map, right? Why was there so much rainfall in Asheville, North Carolina? And then they showed this map. 15 inches over a 3-day period from September 27th to September 30th around the Asheville, Western North Carolina area. I guarantee you the person who wrote this article does not know the history of what is called Hurricane Camille. And I am going to pull this up live on here. Most people don't. Hurricane Camille took place in 1969. None of us here at the table were even alive when this took place. Hurricane Camille followed a very similar path here. It was a Category 5 storm that had weakened by the time it had reached the parts of North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. Here's the path. Here's the path that Hurricane Camille took. It's very similar to the path that what was it, Helen or Helene? Took. That previous hurricane went through the Panhandle, eastern Georgia, northern South Carolina, and western North Carolina. Camille went through Mississippi, Arkansas, and then it went through the southern Midwest, struck into West Virginia, and then Virginia. This is relevant because what happened to Camille was unprecedented. When you actually look at the impact here, and you look at the amount of rainfall, look at what happened to Nelson County, Virginia.
Yeah.
25 inches of rainfall. It was actually
nuts.
Higher than that. The article here goes on to explain. The storm dropped torrential rainfall of 12 to 20 inches with a maximum of 27 inches. Most of the rainfall occurred in Virginia during a 3 to 5 hour period on August 19th to 20th.
That's a lot of rain.
More than 5
really fast.
inches of rain fell near the North Fork of the Ty River in only half an hour, with the grounds already saturated from previous rains. This took place in the summer of 1969.
Yeah.
And then, get this, according to the National Weather Service, quote, actually, this is the craziest part. The worst was in Nelson County here in Virginia, not too far from Culpeper.
Yeah.
27 inches fell. The rainfall was so heavy that there were reports received of birds drowning in trees, cows floating down the Hat Creek, and survivors having to cup hands around their mouth and nose in order to breathe through the deluge. According to the National Weather Service, quote, so much rain fell in such a short amount of time in Nelson County that it was, quote, the probable maximum rainfall which meteorologists compute to be theoretically possible.
Wow.
And this killed like 300 people. It is, to this day, it is the record amount of rainfall ever, that have ever fell in a 24-hour period anywhere on the entire planet in all of recorded human history. And this took place in 1969.
Yeah.
And so for the same crowd that wants to go out here and be like, this hurricane in North Carolina, it is devastating what happened. You can see it in satellite photos, the amount of lights that have gone out. I am not to say I'm belittling what happened. In fact, quite the opposite. I think that the lack of the response that you've seen from the government really goes to show where their priorities are. The point that I'm trying to bring up here is that we have seen devastating events like this before. A late summer hurricane that dumps a tremendous amount of rain. And it's just really convenient that now, 60 years after Hurricane Camille, you're starting to see people say, man, this is because of climate change.
Yeah.
Was this because of climate change? Because this dumped more rain than was physically possible.
Well, and the part that, here's the part that
Well,
makes
back
me...
then, they thought we were headed for an ice age.
Yeah,
So
that's true, because this is 69 and it was
Yeah.
70s. So let's point something out. I'm going to skip this one because I want to go to this next point here. And I apologize we don't have the link. There was some the tweet is a very good tweet, but there's also some language in there, and so I was trying to come back. But thank God for X, because it is amazing how when I search for this information on Google, I can never find it. Whenever I search for information that it's like Google knows I'm looking for something critical of FEMA, and instead it takes me right to FEMA, or instead it takes me right to some sort of news organization that's just regurgitating whatever it is, or it takes me to something that wants to blame climate change. But this guy actually tracked it down. So I'm going to give his name here because he deserves credit for it. But Park McDougall. The announcement comes as FEMA is conducting search and rescue operations in remote sections of Appalachia 6 days after Hurricane Helene made landfall in Florida and moved north, causing widespread destruction and the deaths of at least 183 people across 6 states. President Biden has in recent days approved major disaster declarations for the states affected by the storm. We are meeting the immediate needs with the money that we have, Mr. Mayorkas told reporters on Wednesday while en route to meet with officials in South Carolina. We are expecting another hurricane hitting. We do not have the funds. FEMA does not have the funds to make it through the season. Now, I'm going to read you this next thing. This is directly from fiscal year 2024 awards from FEMA. These are FEMA grants. For fiscal year 2024, the Department of Homeland Security will provide $640.9 million of available funds to enable non-federal entities to offset allowable costs incurred for services associated with non-citizen migrant arrivals in their communities. The funding will be distributed through two opportunities, $300 million through SSP allocated and $340.9 million through SSP competitive. So, it's not that FEMA doesn't have the money. It's that FEMA dollars, to the tune of $640 million of it, was allocated toward entities dealing with migrant issues. I wonder what we could have done. Now this will
Probably
come
went
up.
to the Hamptons.
This will come up. Yeah, probably, right. This is the part where, again, Wandering Warrior was like, I'm just here for when Nick loses it. This is the part where Walz and Harris will come in and say, well, gosh, if only we had have gotten that border bill passed that the Republicans killed because they wanted the problem more than they wanted the solution. Here's my question. Why did you need more money, more people, and more authority to do what the previous administration had already been doing with the same amount of money, people, and authority? The answer is you didn't. You wanted this crisis. You helped create this crisis. You facilitate this crisis. You're spending over $600 million through an organization like FEMA in order to prop up probably the same blue cities that actually advocated for and voted for sanctuary city policies. The money's now going to them instead of for the people that everyone assumes this is why FEMA wants money. The left is coming out right now, and Newsweek is like trashing Republicans who voted against additional FEMA fund. See, it's their fault. You know, if you had an ounce, just a frigging ounce of journalistic integrity, you would be going to FEMA and you would say, my gosh, why are we allocating funds for this as opposed to the things that most Americans think it's allocated for? And the answer is very simple, because that's the trick. That's the political trick. And again, nobody gets to tell me it doesn't work or they're not doing it, because I'm in a state government. I know how this works. It's always the same thing. It's you advocate for the budget of something based off of the people's perception of why it exists. It exists to help people that have been impacted by a major hurricane that comes in and impacted them in ways that they couldn't have possibly predicted, because this doesn't typically happen. So that's how you justify the funding for it. And then once you have that nice little big pot of money, you go ahead and distribute it in accordance with either your political objectives or to benefit your political allies or to maybe cover up the massive problem you created through a complete dereliction of duty. And then you go back to the American people and say, we need more money. Look at these hurricane victims.
Yep.
This is the sort of thing right here. This is the sort of thing right here that takes me from let's have a civil discussion to I'm just ready to fight.
Can I tell you a story of a conversation that I had last night on Twitter, actually? There was a space that was held by a guy that I'm friends with he follows me because of my election analysis. And he had about like 60 people on this space. Most of them were like Trump supporters, or they were conservatives or Republicans, but there was one guy in the space that was on the left. And I think a couple people in our chat actually were listening to this conversation last night, and they know what happened. I was asked about some stuff, about like the election and modeling and stuff like that, and then somehow we got into a broader, and again, this is like 60 people listening, but there was only like 3 or 4 of us that were speakers. And then we got into a broader conversation about the election at large, right? Not just in Virginia. And we started talking about the impact that the hurricane could have in states like Georgia and North Carolina. And then we started asking this question of like, why does it seem that Trump is polling very strongly in terms of things like economics, but the polling shows that it's a dead heat? And I brought up that, well, it's because we live in a post-economics era when it comes to politics. People aren't voting economics, they're voting values. Well, this left-wing guy, the one left-wing guy in the entire like chat, spoke up And this guy was the most arrogant person I think I've ever heard in my entire life. He spent the entire time talking about elite institutions and high IQ and how he hates the low IQ MAGA people. And then he went on to say, yeah, exactly. And, we can't do anything to the, J.D. Vances and, Vivek Ramaswamy's, the intelligent people on the right that are pandering to these stupid people. But you know what? We can beat over the head and beat into submission the low IQ people that they're pandering to. And so, like, when we see, and he's talking about people on the left, and he said, like, when we see, he's talking, about his side, this hurricane, running through, eastern Georgia and western North Carolina, we're rooting for the hurricane.
Hey, I'm glad he said it.
And at that point, I blew up on this guy, and I was like, I even said, I'm like, you are the enemy, buddy.
Yeah.
You are we were having this like civil discussion about numbers and data and statistics, and I knew this guy was the most arrogant person I've ever listened to on Twitter, and that really means something, because there's a lot of arrogant elitist people out there. But no, I mean him literally. This is not an exaggeration, and there were a couple people that listened to our podcast that were listening to this space last night that can back me up. You literally saying I'm going to root for the hurricane to kill people that I think are low IQ idiots because they're voting for the other side. They're voting for Republicans. And then you wonder why they're voting for Republicans, because you're rooting for them to die.
Yeah.
I even told him, I'm like, we don't share a country. You are my enemy. Mm-hmm. Listening to that set me over the edge. And I said some other stuff that I will not say on this podcast. Many things that started with the word F.
With the letter F?
Who I even said, I was like, who the F do you think you are?
Yeah.
And honestly, that right there confirmed that to me that like Carl Schmitt's friend enemy distinction is very true, because this guy was rooting for the death of his political opponents. He didn't care what had happened here because he thought, well, this will help us in North Carolina. This will help us in Georgia. Because it's the other side that's suffering. In fact, I don't want Biden and Harris to do anything, because I want them to suffer because they're voting against me. Like, that is what we're dealing with at this point. We are not dealing with rational actors that just simply have a policy dispute, and they just want to address climate change, and they just have a different way of reaching a shared end goal. We don't have a shared end goal.
Well, let me let's do this, because I want to get people to resources on this one too. So I'm going to list off a couple of names here, and I'd really encourage you to go look at go follow them on Instagram. One is Kagan Dunlap. Kagan's actually going to probably be coming on the show here, I think, next month. Kagan Dunlap is a active duty Marine, but on Instagram he's actually stationed in North Carolina, but he's over on the coast. And he's been sharing a lot of really good information from people on the ground on what's going on. So Kagan Dunlap, that's a great one. That's KAGANDUNLAP. Tim Kennedy. Tim Kennedy he's a former SF guy, former UFC fighter, really, really good dude. He's actually on the ground over there. He's also got some friends over there. Tim Kennedy is a great one to follow for updates on what's going on. Part of the reason I'm giving you this too is because I've just become so furious with the way the press covers this stuff, to where they can't just give you like vital information. They have to interject an agenda half the time. Another one is Matt Boudreau. Matt Boudreau's been on the show before as well. Really good guy. He lives in that part of North Carolina. And he's been putting out some information too on how people can help. And then Justin Rhodes. Justin Rhodes actually lives right outside of Asheville, very big in the homesteader community. We went down there and actually visited his homestead. Really good guy. Him and Becca are just great people, great family. Thank God none of them were hurt, but they definitely lost
like the lower half of their farm.
They lost a significant. They had some pretty bad damage and whatnot. But he's also given information on how people can help out there. So if you want to get updates, like if you're a little bit frustrated, and I'm not saying all news outlets have been horrible, but if you're getting a little bit frustrated and you want to hear from people that are actually sharing again some good information, Kagan Dunlap, Matt Boudreau, Tim Kennedy, Justin Rhodes. I highly encourage you to, first of all, if you're watching this show, you'll probably like these guys' content. But I really think they're doing some important work. And again, for anybody that wants to help or look for ways to help, these guys are putting out some good information. So go follow those guys. Okay, we're going to jump to one more topic, and then we're going to hit the vice presidential debate. This next topic, we're going to be kind of quick, because it's basically we're talking about the missile attack in Israel and what's going on in Lebanon. And I want to point out a couple things here because I've been seeing some stuff on the right that kind of worries me. I don't expect anybody.
Nick Fuentes is not on the right. He's controlled opposition.
Well, I'm not even talking about him. What I'm saying is that I don't expect anyone to prioritize another government or another country over the United States. I don't do that, and I wouldn't ask anybody else to do that. But I think what I'm also kind of frustrated with is this idea that I'm watching certain people that I tend to agree with ideologically, and they have this rendition of what's going on over there that just doesn't make any sense to me. When you got to live in a country where you got to have an app on your phone that tells you where the rockets are coming in, and then, oh, by the way, if you don't make the app regional in nature, your phone will blow up too much, right? And I don't mean literally. I mean it's just you're constantly getting alerts. Oh, another rocket attack, another rocket attack, another rocket attack.
Didn't you get the app while you were there?
Yeah, I did. While we were over there, we got it, and they told us that like you're gonna have to put it on a region, or it's gonna buzz the entire time you're here. And they weren't wrong. And so I don't think people have a proper appreciation for what it is to live in a place where literally it's an existential threat.
You definitely have people on one side saying that Israel just either shouldn't exist or shouldn't fight for themselves or retaliate in any way, or they need to have a measured response that is equal or lesser than whatever happened to them, which is like, that's not how you deter anything from happening. And then you have the other side that's like, I want Israel to turn Iran into glass.
Yeah. Well,
and so you kind of have
okay,
these
Lindsay,
extremes.
Graham.
Well, no. Here's what I'd say. This is the part that I guess I want people to understand, because a lot of times what people do is they'll look at the technological and the professional difference between like the IDF and Hamas, or even the IDF and Hezbollah. First of all, people have no idea how massive Hezbollah is, and Hezbollah is essentially an occupying force within Lebanon. And it's a proxy. It's a proxy of. It's not even proxy is not even the right word. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of the Islamic Republican Guard Corps out of Iran, and they regularly launch missiles. They regularly go over and invade Israel. And again, when you're sitting in a situation where theoretically, your hospitals, your schools, and whatnot become the targets of your enemy. And then your response to that is to say, we're going to launch an operation into this area, evacuate this area. Look, I'm sorry, I don't buy it anymore, because I've conducted combat operations and I've seen the levels that the IDF actually does go to in order to try to make people aware of what's happening next. It's far more than any sort of like international agreements and treaties actually require. I don't know of any military that actually puts in that much effort. And then people will look at it like, oh, but look at all the devastation. Look at all of this. Well, yeah, devastation happens in war. And the worst kind of war is the sort of urban combat that you see going on in places like Gaza. And then the issue there is, well, okay, wait a second. If Hamas sees its own civilian population as useful tools with respect to their military strategy, which is to say Hamas knows it can't beat the IDF in a battle, but it wants to fight anyway. So what's the best way to do it? Well, if you want to get Western media and you want to get the West to lean on Israel, then the way that you do it is you elevate your civilian casualties, either through lies and propaganda or through actual civilian casualties. But when you're not allowing your own people to leave dangerous areas, when you're forcing them to stay, or you're using them as human shields, you're the one increasing your civilian casualties. And this is also the part where people need to understand that the technological difference between let's say the United States military and the Taliban was exponential. But if you're fighting door to door in a place like Kandahar, or if you're fighting door to door, like again, the military, the professionalism and technological difference between the United States military and the people I was fighting in Iraq was exponential. Wasn't even close. There's no way they could win in a stand up fight. But if you're having to go door to door in a heavy populated urban area, and you actually are trying to minimize civilian casualties, that's incredibly dangerous. The technological advantage is cut significantly. It's the reason why organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah engage in what they call asymmetric warfare. And I think what I would like is for people to understand that while Hamas and Hezbollah have absolutely zero concern for civilian casualties, they don't distinguish between civilian and military. And insofar as they do, they target the civilians because they're easier to kill. I don't think we should be creating a moral equivalency argument. And so I'm not asking people to justify sending a bunch of funds over to Israel. And I'm certainly not asking anybody to justify sending troops over to Israel. But I think I would at least like people to understand that Hamas and Hezbollah are the bad guys here. I think that's, for me, that seems very, very well established. And I'm not ignorant of the area. I'm not ignorant of the history. I'll be happy to take you back through the history of Levant going back 3,000 years, not to 47. Right.
Well, people always say that it's the Palestinians that they're trying to defend, and Hamas is not the Palestinians. But the problem is the Palestinians have voted Hamas into power.
That's another.
Now
thing.
the counter argument is that that was in like 2006, but then the counter to that is that
kind of like
they have
saying,
like an 80-70% approval rating among the Palestinians.
Right. It's kind of like saying I hate Americans because or Americans aren't the problem. It's just Biden. It's like, but then people voted for Biden. Yeah. So half of the Americans are the problem in that situation, right?
No one in the comments said, personally, I don't think there's any good guys in this conflict. I'm sorry, I respectfully disagree with you. I don't think, let me put it this way. I don't think there's any perfect guys in this conflict because perfect people don't exist. But I definitely want Israel to win this conflict. I'll tell you that much right now. Now, to the extent that the U.S. should be involved,
somebody was asking you to make an argument for us helping to fund Israel.
So
because that's kind of where the issue is. Most people are like, that's fine. They can have their argument. They can do their thing. I just don't want us funding it.
Sure. So step one is recognize that. Again, for me, it's my first position is who's right or wrong in the conflict. Like, so for instance, Ukraine and Russia, I think Russia is wrong in that conflict. I don't think that necessarily obligates the United States to essentially provide the vast majority of funding and equipment for Ukraine. Now, you can make that argument, and I'll politely listen, because I do think Russia illegally invaded. But I think there's other problems there. And I think there's other things the United States did very, very poorly, which actually contributed to a war taking place in the first place.
Is there such a thing as a country legally invading somebody else's country?
Yes, there is. So, for instance, if you're launching stuff into my, if you haven't invaded my country, but you're launching missiles and stuff into it, and then I invade your country in order to prevent you from doing that, that's illegal. That's illegal invasion. So, anyways, my argument would be. I do think so. Some people say that there should be no such thing as foreign aid. I agree with that most of the time. I do think that there's appropriate times for foreign aid to exist. Like for instance,
I think it should start at zero, and they can earn their foreign aid. How about that?
Yeah, no. Here's what it comes down to. Like when it comes to things like the Lend-Lease Act during World War II. I think that there's times where it can make a lot of sense to assist an ally, especially if they're fighting a common enemy.
But we weren't technically at that point treaty-bound allies of the British in 1940.
No, I get that. But my point is,
I'm not saying that I was against Lend-Lease, but
I don't want to spend a bunch of time on this topic. We're going to go through a little bit on what it is. I'm trying to answer a question. So let me just answer this question very, very quick. Here's what I think. The argument that can be made for when is it appropriate for the United States to potentially provide aid or assistance to a country that we're either allied with or have common interests with. I think it generally has to do with is there a common enemy or is there a common objective? Hezbollah has obviously killed American servicemen in Beirut. Hamas is a terrorist organization. So is there some benefit in order to provide resources to an organization or to a military or a country that is combating those elements? Yeah, I could see an argument for that. Now, then it becomes a question of proportion. How much? What are you doing? It's not that we're dropping off. Like most of the foreign aid, as I understand it, that's going to Israel is in the form of weapons. So what it is the United States has obviously munitions and weapons producers. We buy that stuff and then we give it to allies. And there's certain benefits associated with that. So here's what I would say. Can I make a case? Yeah. I can make a case, but I'm not sitting here like demanding that you agree with me on this. The part that's frustrating for me is, again, watching some of the comments where it's just like, no, Israel's just, there's no good guys in this fight. Like, I don't know.
I think that what this is a proxy for a much deeper problem, which I'm sure at some point we'll talk more about.
Yeah, we will.
Because it's not that all these like personalities on Twitter or YouTube honestly really care about Lebanon or even Gaza for that matter. This is a much deeper, this is a proxy ideological battle that traces itself back decades. And there's other problems too, right? You know, it's a in some ways it's a certain framing of that friend enemy distinction in a way. You know, somebody once, there was this Twitter account, very reasonable account, by the way. This is not a radical account. In fact, this guy was like a moderate Republican. But he tweeted something once, and I can't remember the guy's name because it was just some random account. But he tweeted something once that I thought was kind of profound that explained in a twisted way what the issue is. And he asked, you know, why is anti-Semitism on the rise? Mm-hmm. And he just posted an image, and it was a trans pride progress flag. Uh-huh. And I think that in that one simple tweet, he explains so much of the issue right now, and also so much of the misappropriation of the issue. Because as we've talked before, the problem is leftism. The problem is Marxism, specifically cultural Marxism, because we're not dealing with you know, people saying seize the means of production. Obviously, there are some people that want that, but we're dealing with people that are applying an oppressor dynamic, right? And what he was trying to get to is that there's plenty of, let's be honest, mostly secular Jews in the U.S. that are very, very, very left-wing. What's left out of that is that if you actually look at like practicing Jews, especially like Orthodox Jews, they tend to be very conservative, actually. I'm pretty sure Trump actually won Orthodox Jews, like very conservative Orthodox Jews in the U.S. You can look at the voting patterns in places where there are a lot of Orthodox Jews in the U.S., like in New York City, for example. Trump won those neighborhoods. The problem is that secular Jews in the U.S. really, really give a bad name to the entire community because they tend to be very left-wing progressive. And so like that's what this guy was trying to get at with this like meme post of his. And I think that when you have these individuals like Jake Shields or stuff like that that are attacking Israel or saying some of the stuff that they're saying online, what they're doing is that they're applying their understanding of American politics and them looking at the actions of secular left-wing Jews in the U.S. pushing for things like wokeism or transgenderism, and then they're applying that to the nation of Israel, which I think is a misappropriation because I don't think that Israel is sponsoring, you know, the trans movement in the U.S., right? But you get what I mean. Like it's a linkage that is being made that I think maybe is taking things too far with that linkage, but I think that that's what really is the heart of the matter, which is a whole nother discussion for another podcast.
Well, and Rocky Top Tom said, y'all must do an extremely long episode on U.S. pre-World War II isolationism versus post-World War II proxy preventionist actions and the evolution of the military-industrial complex. A lot of people will watch that. That would actually be a really fun episode. I'll end it with this. I think that here's what I think people need to understand. I actually don't think, and I could be wrong, let me just say this, I actually don't think we're as close to some sort of major conflict in the Middle East as a lot of people are predicting.
I agree.
And some of that is actually suggested to me by the way Iran is operating right now. I think a lot of people over in the Middle East are watching to see what happens with this election because I personally believe that a Harris-Biden, or excuse me, a Harris-Walz administration, I think it's difficult to predict. I honestly think Harris would probably get us involved, probably more likely to get us involved in a conflict than Trump. And I know
you can tell by what Iran is doing. Iran, I mean, it's already been shown that they have hacked. They have worked to hack Trump's campaign, and then also they are trying to basically pay people to assassinate Trump. I mean, these are the types of things that are coming out right now. So they definitely prefer Harris.
No, and I would see why, because I don't believe that Harris and Walz would actually have anything approaching a coherent foreign policy. I think it would be, again, we'll get into a larger conversation sometime about kind of the post World War II order, because that affects a lot of this, and we discussed it a little bit last time. But here's what I'll say: I don't think we're as close to a conflict as some people are making out. The fact that Iran launched these missiles, I think they felt they kind of had to, because Hezbollah is, again, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Iranian government, specifically the IRGC. Israel has done a fantastic job of targeting their leadership and eliminating them. Iran doesn't have the capacity to really do as much as I see these things about, like the Iranian military is far better than they actually think.
They can't win a full-blown war.
They can't win a full-blown war. They would, let me put it this way, they would have difficulty doing it even without major U.S. support. But there would be some. So here's what I'll say. I don't think we're as close. And I think to some degree there's going to be a lot of people looking at this, and there's always going to be heavy tension. But if Iran was really at the point where they wanted to push this issue, they would have done a whole lot more than what they did. I think it's a saving face operation for them to show that they struck back at the heartland of Israel, blah, 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 blah. But ultimately they know they can't affect this. Hezbollah, the IDF has done an excellent job of specifically targeting Hezbollah leadership and destroying it. Like it is truly
They're
impressive.
decimated right now.
At some point,
their leader's dead.
Yeah, at some point I'd like to do a whole thing just from a military tactical standpoint on what that was. Okay, so
But
I
all
mentioned
of these things that we have discussed so far are things that our future president and vice president are going to have to deal with. And it's crazy how messed up things are right now, and the left is still being like, economy's actually fine.
Yeah.
Everything's fine. Inflation's much better now. We're doing better.
The price of oil might be going up pretty soon.
Okay, hold on. But the point being that this is why all of these things are why this last debate was kind of important, and there are some highlights I think that we want to go over.
No, we're going to go over the VP highlights to segue into that. What I'm going to say is the reason why we kind of brought up why would I bring up this missile launch to just say I don't think it's that big a deal on the big thing. It's because little things can be turned into very, very big things depending on who the administration is.
Right.
When an administration wants to do something, let's say you have the first female president that decides she wants to show that she will not be messed with, and a military intervention is a good way to do that, combined with other shadier economic interests or whatever else it might be. That's when these things become a proxy for something bigger. They become a casus belli, right? A cause to go to war, a quote legitimate moral cause to go to war. And so you want the sort of person, you want a commander in chief that is able to differentiate between genuine threats, which must be met with military force, and the degree of military force is necessary. Hopefully you also have someone that's going to actually follow the Constitution if we go to war, versus someone that sees this as opportunities to achieve other objectives which might not be so obvious. And that leads us into the vice presidential debate. Now, there was some people on the left pointing out that, oh, well, who cares? And it's like, you keep bashing Kamala, but the vice president really can't do much. It is true that if you look at John Adams, I think once described the vice presidency as the most useless political office ever devised by the minds of men, because they have like two major responsibilities: to provide over the Senate, in which case they can only vote in the event of a tie, and to check on the daily health of the president. Like that's the job, right? But they are auditioning, and if you look at a case like this, they are auditioning for the lead job as well. And one of the things that when Vance got picked as the VP candidate, I remember looking at him as, well, okay, this is someone that, it's vice presidents don't often become president, but it does happen. I want to say, I think it's governors generals, vice presidents, or something like that. But it is important for a number of reasons. And so I watched this vice presidential debate. I missed part of it, but watched this debate and then went back and watched some of the clips from it. And we're going to show you several right now on ones that we thought were kind of the most interesting. And again, the reason why I think this is important, because we are, again, I've never said most important election of our lifetime, but I really do think it is. I really do think this is the most important one of my lifetime. And that's not because I believe the president is going to save everything, right, or destroy everything. I believe there's much bigger issues, but there's the potential for the greatest impact that I've probably seen in my lifetime, in part because of how much the bureaucracy absolutely despises Trump and Vance. And again, that's born out of the fact that in our last episode we said who's really running the country, and we gave three entities that we think, and the bureaucracy, the federal bureaucracy, was a major part of that. So I know I'm heavily invested in the Trump campaign, primarily because I think they're going to go after the federal bureaucracy in a way that I think is long overdue. And so watching this debate was very interesting. So let's go ahead and get to some of the clips, and we'll do some analysis on this. Some of it funny, right? Some of it just interesting. But let's go ahead and watch through, just kind of, again, not necessarily in chronological order, but just some highlights that we thought were interesting. Go ahead.
It clarifies for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status. temporary protected status.
Well,
Nora?
Margaret, but
Thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important
We're
because
going to turn out of the
debate,
economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that you guys weren't going to
we're-
fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That
Thank
is
you,
the
Senator.
facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank
our
you,
own
Senator, for
leadership.
describing the legal
And
process.
Kamala-
We
and
have so
Kamala
much
Harris
to get
opened up
to,
that
Senator.
Pause right there.
Yeah.
How disingenuous are these people? And have you seen the left that have been quoting that clip and saying, you guys said you weren't going to fact check, as if there's this thing where it's like when the media, plays the fact check card, it's like, oh, you've been owned.
Yeah.
You can't question the fact check. First off, who are these people? Actually, I've got a better question. Why did he attend this debate? This is a serious question. Why did he attend a debate hosted by the enemy?
So let me go ahead and say two things on that. I'm going to answer that question. The first one is, yeah, you're right. The left has jumped on this as, oh, J.D. Vance is afraid of fact checking. No, he's afraid of partisanship within a debate posing as fact checking, and he did an excellent job, just completely. I mean, right off the cuff, right? And he wasn't yelling, he wasn't mad, he didn't have a bunch of pause words. He just sat there and explained what this process actually looks like. And she arrogantly says, "Thanks for describing the legal process." I guarantee you, almost no American understood that was actually a process to become legally in the United States. And he just sat there and described it beautifully. And for her to arrogantly suggest, oh, see, we're right. They are legal. We properly fact checked you. It's like, this is the problem. You guys are so intellectually dishonest about what is actually going on that you honestly think you can manipulate these things and then say, oh, we fact checked you. No, J.D. Vance did the Lord's work right there and actually informing people on what this process actually looks like, because I guarantee you it bears zero resemblance to what most Americans thought it looked like. The second part I will say
and
is,
since then they have started, people have gone on to the app, they've downloaded the app, they've gone on to it, and they've just put random information into there, and they've gotten themselves approved to come to our country. And I mean, it is the easiest, I guess you could call it a process, but how could you say that is a legal process when you've got people waiting in line legitimately? And I'd like to know, explain to me what exactly asylum seeking is. What is this?
It's an open door policy.
You're
for
a
anybody to enter the
refugee.
US.
You're seeking asylum. Asylum from what? We should have some kind of threshold.
well, we do. We
should
do. They
have-
just don't follow it. Well, and what they would say in Haiti, like, so you might be able to make a legitimate argument for asylum seeking from Haiti. But the problem is that the process that they're now putting in place, and like you said, it's with the open wand. Like, if I'm an open borders person, I have a big enough hole in the law to drive a truck through it, and I can do whatever I want. So let me answer your question.
But this app will actually get them a plane ticket and fly them from where they are into our country. They don't even have to come up through the border. Our country will use your tax dollars to fly these people that we have no idea who they are, and they don't even need a legitimate ID or anything to come on over here. They're just importing anybody who just willy-nilly wants to come here with whatever fake excuse they have. And as far as we know, they could be terrorists, they could be drug mules, they could be, whatever. I mean, Haiti's got a problem with cannibalism. They could be cannibals.
So here's what I would say. To answer your question, why would you do a debate with the enemy? I always think these are interesting because I can argue either way, right? I could argue that what we should be doing at this stage is completely icing out the mainstream press, and that's in many cases that's the route I've chosen. I have people all the time ask me why I won't do more interviews, and I will say, look, for 8 years in the General Assembly, I did interviews with the press, and with very, very few exceptions, they always use as an opportunity to try to make themselves look objective while at the same time completely misrepresenting or attempting to manipulate the story in such a way as to make me look bad. It was never a fair shake. Never a fair shake. And my attitude has been, fine, I will build my own mechanism to talk to people, social media, And that way I don't got to go through the press. And guess what? I'm pretty open with what I believe and what I say, so you can choose to like me or hate me, but at least you know what I actually believe, not what the press is telling you. That's my position. The other position would be, this is the way this has always been done. If you don't do the debate, you look scared. And if you're really good, you can actually illustrate not only how good your positions are, your policy are, and how aware you are of the situation facing the country. You can only demonstrate how bad your opponent is, which I actually think he did in this, but you can also demonstrate how bad the media is. And I will say that J.D. Vance has probably been one of the best. The only other guy I would put up against J.D. Vance as being the best at taking out the press would be Vivek Ramaswamy. They have been the best on like just immediate recall on issues to where when something like this happens, they know exactly how to deal with it, and information gets out to people in a way that it otherwise wouldn't have. And so I can say I completely understand someone saying, screw it, we're not doing business with these people anymore. I also understand someone says, look, I think I'm ready to actually compete in this field and do it well and potentially get some benefit out of it. And again, I think he did. But
I'm not saying that he didn't do a good job, but I think it was a mistake to even attend this debate. And the reason why is because we give them credibility when we show up on stage. We are loaning them credibility.
I don't disagree.
And we should be ruthlessly applying a friend-enemy distinction against the press. When Donald Trump said the mainstream media is the enemy of the people, that was probably the most based and true thing he ever said in his entire life. Those reporters are not objective. They're not neutral, in part because nobody's ever truly neutral. They're not objective. They're not neutral. They're not fact-checking. They're providing covering fire for the other guy standing next to J.D. Vance, Tim Walz. J.D. Vance did not go into a debate against Tim Walz. He went into a 3v1 debate.
Sure. With
him facing off against two moderators and the Democrat vice presidential nominee. And I'm just really sick and tired of watching our people. I think that Vance did a good job from the clips that I've seen, but I'm really sick and tired of us giving our enemies credibility by us standing on stage and basically endorsing them managing a debate. We should be telling them to go pound sand.
Okay,
and totally ignoring that.
I feel like I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, but what I am saying is I don't think ABC gained credibility here, in part because
you
of the
mean
way,
CBS?
Oh, sorry, CBS. I don't think CBS gained credibility in part because of the way of J.D. Vance handled himself. One of the ways you can actually rob an organization of credibility by exposing it for its lack of credibility. Now, I'm sure your return argument would be like, haven't they already done that? Like, how many more opportunities do you give them to do it? But again, I think that's an individual choice that a candidate's going to have to make on what they want to achieve. I'm not going to delve too much more into that. But let's go ahead and jump to our next clip here.
Here we go. This one's only 13 seconds.
I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country, and we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop.
So the funny part about this clip,
That's
right?
crazy.
And everybody has been commenting about how civil this debate actually was, and it was a very, very civil debate for the most part. But what's funny is J.D. Vance is responding to this idea that, they're claiming that Kamala Harris let all these people in. He's like, no. He goes, what I'm claiming is X, Y, and Z. And as he goes to explain it, the camera is on Tim Walz, and Tim Walz does this little nod and smile like, oh, yeah, okay, that's a good point. and it's another thing that kind of demonstrates that there's a lot of ways that you can lose a debate, right? Not all of it is in the answers that you give. Some of it's in the gestures that you give. Some of it's in the facial expressions. Some of it is, in this point, maybe Walz was attempting to be conciliatory or acknowledging that Vance was making a different type of point or wasn't accusing, but it doesn't matter. It just looks like, dude, you got to be present on what you're doing. I thought it was funny. I also think it's interesting that. Well, I'll just leave it at that. I thought that whole part was pretty funny. It wasn't the only time Vance really screwed up in this debate. All right, next clip.
When Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump.
Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence.
Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax.
And I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster.
Pause. So a couple things here. I thought it was, I mean, again, there's obviously a larger response. This is kind of a clip. But I think it's, oh my gosh, there's a part of me that just thinks it is horribly dishonest to say, oh, when an American thing was shot down, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's his. Okay. When the U.S. Embassy was attacked in Baghdad, Donald Trump, instead of invading Tehran and trying to set up, fighting a 20-year war and set up a parliamentary democracy, what did he do? He targeted the head of the IRGC, who was responsible for the attack, and killed him. And then all of a sudden Iran was like, oh, okay, we're going to go ahead and slowly back into the bushes like that Homer Simpson meme. And so this is a horribly disingenuous way to look at Trump, because when you look at things like the Abraham Accords in the Middle East, that was the most comprehensive, most effective peace deal we've ever had in the Middle East. Like arguably that was the most effective peace deal ever since the treaty with Israel and Egypt. That was enormous. When you look at Putin invaded other countries during the Bush senior administration, during the Obama administration.
No, Bush Jr.
I'm sorry, Bush Jr. Bush Jr., Obama, skip 4 years, and then Biden. But he didn't invade anyone. And I love it because people say, oh, that's because Trump gave him everything he wanted. Like what?
What did he give him?
What did he give him?
What part of Ukraine did he give him?
This is the part that because I can show you the parts of Ukraine that other administrations gave Putin. I can't show you any part of Ukraine that Trump gave Putin, right? I can show you the parts of Georgia, right, that were invaded under other administrations. I can't show you that with Trump. In the Middle East, when they were fighting ISIS and they were fighting in parts of Iraq and Syria, again, did Donald Trump launch a massive operation in order to try to set up a parliamentary democracy in Syria? No. He led to strategic operations that essentially destroyed ISIS. He wasn't, again, he used the military in order to launch punitive expeditions, which were largely and very, very specifically targeted either at the individuals actually committing acts of war or the leadership structure within their military that was directing those acts of war. And two things happened. One, bad guys got killed instead of tons of civilians. And enemy leadership that was responsible for it had to pay a price. And that's one of the things that I appreciated the most about the Trump administration. It was the understanding that if you want to prevent civilian casualties while at the same time providing genuine deterrence, go after the military leadership that is doing this, because when they start to pay a price, instead of a bunch of 19-year-olds with AK-47s, all of a sudden they're not too keen. So for Walls, of all people, the guy who, oh, by the way, I'm a command sergeant major. No, you're an acting command sergeant major and you got out before your unit deployed. And then you claim that you carried weapons in combat. Yeah, your combat was in Italy, which again would have been cool if it was 1943, 2003, not as much combat going on in Italy.
Well,
Not to mention the fact, not to
lying
mention
about so many different things.
Not to mention the fact that when you look at the withdrawal from Afghanistan that happened under the Biden-Harris administration, and Harris stood by that decision. I was the last person in the room. I agreed with the decision. It is hard to find a more not only embarrassing and destabilizing, but disrespectful to American service members and their families who fought over there. It is hard to find a more disastrous foreign policy decision than the way that Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. I mean, don't get me wrong. The United States has a lot of bad foreign policy decisions, but that one was one of the most insulting. And for Walls to try to use that. So I think Vance did a pretty good job responding to it. Honestly, I would have gone nuclear on that one. I would not have been nice. That would have been. Yeah. Oh,
well,
man.
And it's always easy to see, oh, there was an opening here. He could have hit this angle. He could have hit that angle. But it's always easy to do that. But when you're the one with the pressure trying to speak at the time, we can all armchair quarterback.
Oh yeah, no, I think I think he did a good job. I'm just saying that's.
But
that's
he had
a
few missed opportunities that could have been even. It could have made his performance perfect. Now he did a fantastic job though overall.
Yeah. All right, so let's look at the next clip. We got a few more here.
To a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Pause. Okay, that's a very good response. Much more comprehensive response. Again, I would have probably, I think they were both trying to keep it civil, and I think J.D. Vance is kind of carving out his own approach when it comes to doing this, right? Because, look, Trump is Trump, and Trump is always going to go right for the throat. And so it'll be interesting to see how this develops, because I do think J.D. Vance is being set up to potentially be the successor of kind of to like the movement after Donald Trump. Now, some people might like that, some people might not. I'm not issuing an opinion on it. I'm just saying I think that's happening.
I think what you saw in this debate was a very smooth, measured response, system for J.D. Vance. And I think one of the reasons he was so mellow and stayed so cordial is because he's also fighting the crazy cat lady thing. So when he talked about all these childless cat ladies, and all this, and I 100% agreed with him. And I'm sorry, but I just did. Yeah. But you had women that were just all pearl clutching over him saying that. And, he's been having to kind of do a little damage control for that, because women are so sensitive. You can't say any criticism against women nowadays because we're all a bunch of freaking delicate flowers. And so now he's trying to come across as the kinder, gentler J.D. Vance, I think.
Yeah. Real quick, there's a question from Rocky Top Tom. He goes, would you spend 5 minutes on why President Trump originated the withdrawal? I'm very interested to hear the channel's view on the proposal we leave in the first place. I'm not going to spend 5 minutes on it because we got a couple more clips to go through, but I'll do this. I think Donald Trump, wisely I would say, understood that the idea that we were going to, again, set up a bunch of parliamentary democracies within the Middle East that really didn't have a history for it, either, again, historically, culturally, theologically, like I think it made sense that he kind of realized that this is not something that we need to be doing, and Americans should not be dying or spending endless amounts of cash in order to try to make something happen that probably isn't. And so I think that's why he tried to initiate the withdrawal. Again, I think he tried to withdraw in a way that actually made sense, to where U.S. military equipment wasn't left behind, U.S. allies weren't abandoned. And again, there's that famous discussion of Trump coming in and telling the head of the Taliban, show him the picture. And it was a picture of the guy's house. And he goes, another American dies. Like, again, what was he doing? He was not saying, if you don't do what I like, we're going to be here another 20 years. He goes, no, if you don't listen, I'm going to kill you. And look, I'm sorry, I'm here for it. Right? And I think that would have led to it, because I do believe it was time to get out. I am very, very skeptical. Look, if you would have talked to me in the early 2000s, I was a young soldier. I was mad about 9/11. I was ready to go to war, man. And I do think there was justification to go to war in certain capacities. I don't think it made sense to try to set up, 20-year-long conflicts where we were supposedly going to reshape a country in our image that really had no underlying desire to be shaped in our image. And so that's one of the reasons why I respect this idea of understanding the military from a punitive expedition standpoint as opposed to a nation building standpoint. This is not to say that nation building is never appropriate, but I would argue it seldom is. So that's my opinion. All right, let's go to the next clip here.
All right.
The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years. Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing worse by the climate.
Again,
he's right about the nuclear thing.
Oh, yeah, he's absolutely right about the nuclear thing. Again, the problem, too, with some of the solar, I do not have a problem with solar. Let me put it this way. I do not have a problem conceptually with solar, with wind, with hydro, with whatever you want. And I do understand that, again, I don't want pollution, right? But we all accept a certain level of pollution. And again, everybody accepts that level of pollution. Why? I know, because the climate activists are running around on private jets, right? So everybody accepts some level of pollution. The question is, what's the appropriate amount? How do you actually mitigate or deal with it? And I think he's right that, again, it is all fine and good for the left to constantly talk about climate change as an existential threat. We all know they don't really believe it, because if they did really believe it, they would be drastically changing their own behaviors, and they're not. They're not. This has become a major power grab for them. It's also become a way to reward their friends and hurt their enemies. The other thing that I would say is that I am a little bit, I always get skeptical whenever I hear the government say we need to invest. I've always said that investing is what you do with your money or with money people gave to you. That's not what the government does. The government redistributes funds. But I also understand, by the nature of the debate he's in right now, and people are watching this and they're thinking, okay, well, I don't believe that, they don't believe climate change is a hoax. They believe that's a flippant way to address the question. I like the way that J.D. Vance handled this, because he focused on what's the actual solution instead of going back and forth on what Trump said or what Trump didn't say or what did he really mean, or is it a hoax, is it not a hoax?
And he also implied that the hoax is the fact that they think it's so important. Like him saying that they don't even believe their own rhetoric, that lets you know that it is their rhetoric is the hoax, not necessarily whatever's happening with the environment, but their rhetoric attached to it and the policies attached to it are based on their rhetoric, which is a hoax.
Well, and again, it's the larger point too, that the left is running into contradictory arguments, which they typically don't have a problem with, but they're running into the contradictory arguments of, like, I want to take care of the laborer, even the ones making your solar panels. I want to take care of exploited people, even the ones mining for cobalt in the DRC, like in a Chinese mine.
Like, they don't mind slave labor as long as they're not the one. They don't see it. As long as they don't see it, they're totally fine with it.
Well, and again, part of the problem too is that if you did bring all the solar panel manufacturing in the United States, the cost of the solar panels would increase exponentially, because of the inevitable either government subsidization or deals that would be hacked in order to do it. And so this is the part where it's like, look.
And ultimately, solar isn't clean like they say it is. It's
certainly not as clean as they claim.
You have to manufacture it. Think about everything that happens with the manufacturer. And then when you decommission it, it's insanely difficult to decommission. Yeah. There's a lot of forever chemicals that are just leaching into the ground off of it. They have to literally scorch the earth, basically, use the worst types of pesticides that go into the ground in order to do these solar fields. These are industrial solar fields. They are not solar farms. There's nothing being farmed whatsoever. It's scarring the earth. It's bad for the countryside. But they want to talk about cow farts.
When I go back, somebody brought up wind too. Yeah, we had a horrible wind deal here in Virginia, but what was funny was Dominion, which is the major power company and power provider in Virginia. They were all for the wind deal, and So the question is why? It's like, well, because they get guaranteed profits because it's a public-private partnership, right? It's a public utility. They get guaranteed profits off of construction projects. Anybody want to take a guess at how much it costs to do offshore wind turbines? I mean, that's enormously expensive. And then you'll watch other politicians go, oh, this is a great jobs program. Look, there's a difference between a job being created based off of genuine consumer demand and make work projects based off of political demand. That's very, very different.
And I'm not against solar panels.
No, I'm not.
I'm totally fine with solar energy. I just don't believe in scorching the earth to plant them in the ground to do it. Just put them on structures, put them on your roof. You do it on your own property, but don't go and scorch the earth to try to supplement a power grid in the most inefficient way possible.
The other thing too that I wish we could have an honest conversation about when it comes to things like electric cars is that when you look at the supply chain, and look, we have some people here that own electric cars, but when it comes to
Christian's got a Tesla, you guys.
You just had to, you know, it was funny.
I didn't. Tina's the one
thanks
that
a lot,
totally.
Tina. Now everybody's gonna think I'm an elitist. I intentionally haven't been trying to brag about that.
All right, so here's what I'm going to say.
I'll brag for you.
When you look at the logistical, components with respect to the batteries and the minerals that are needed and everything else, obviously there's if carbon footprint is what you're trying to avoid, there's a huge carbon footprint both in the manufacture of these. Also, I always find it comical when they have these charging stations which are being pumped full of diesel, right, in order to make the charging station work. But that's not to say that there isn't an environmental benefit, right? If you have, so for instance, there will be less smog in an area where you have more electric vehicles. That doesn't mean that your overall carbon footprint is that shouldn't be factored into the equation. But if someone were to tell me, hey, Nick, we understand that this is a problem over here and we're looking for ways in order to mitigate that, but we do appreciate that there's a whole lot less smog in this area as a result of not having 50,000 cars on the road in a compact area, with exhaust going, sitting in traffic jams. I'd be like, okay, now I'm arguing with someone who is reasonable, and I can have that discussion and we can appreciate the trade-offs which are taking place. But I despise this argument where it's like, oh no, I'm doing this because I'm a good and moral person and I want to save the environment. Well, no, I think what you want to do is address your own angst and make yourself feel virtually superior without actually understanding the logistical train that makes it possible. Stephen S. said, here in Egypt, we've covered the entire desert and solar farms, and we still had rolling blackouts all summer. Just use oil, please. Thank you, Stephen. This is something, too, where, again, Elon Musk has said this before, where it's like, gosh, we could do all of America's energy requirements by just doing massive solar projects out in the deserts of Utah. And I look at that, and I'm like, okay, I'm sure that works on a spreadsheet. Right? I'm sure if you calculate the number of energy, the number of watts, and the number of panels and the sort of thing, I'm sure that works out. I'm also very sure it would not actually play out that easily if that's the sort of thing that you try to implement.
Let's just have a good hailstorm and see what happens. I mean, how many of these things have been completely destroyed by massive hailstorms?
Yeah. Well, I had a Democrat once tell me, well, the storage is also a huge issue when it comes to solar energy.
Well, there's a lot of power loss, energy loss in getting it to the storage.
I'll never forget, I was with the Democrat once, and he said, well, we could fund all of America's energy requirements with just the size of Delaware. And I looked at him and because I think he was from Delaware. He's either from Delaware or maybe he's from Massachusetts. I said, is Delaware on board? Like, are they ready to be paved? Like, what are we? And I get what he was saying, right? But I just thought it was fun. All right, let's go ahead and look at the next one.
Do you want to play this whole thing? Because it's 3 minutes.
I'll say pause.
Looking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off. And they were wrong about it.
Pause.
And for the first time.
So he's the libertarian in you is probably going to be upset about this.
No, the Austrian economist in me is going to be upset about this.
No, the Austrian economist in you should actually be agreeing with him, but maybe not for the reasons that J.D. Vance might fully realize. Lynn Alden, the economist, who one day I will beg you to interview her because she does interviews on YouTube. She has brought this up. She wrote this book called Broken Money last year, where she talked about the history of the financial system and what's gone wrong with it. And there's this line in that book where she says that the status of being the world reserve currency has given the United States federal government an incredible amount of leverage around the world, but it has resulted in the hollowing out of America's industrial base, because a global demand for dollars is a lot different than, say, people in Switzerland alone demanding francs. And so what this does is it drives up the value of the dollar artificially than it normally would be, because it is a global reserve currency. It's not just a currency that we use. It's a currency that I can go to, Tajikistan and people will accept. And so what this does is that it makes U.S. exports inherently non-competitive or less competitive compared to other countries in states where they're not using the world reserve currency. What this means is that over time, as the demand for dollars rises, our competitiveness declines. And so what naturally happens is market forces take effect and U.S. manufacturing goes overseas.
So here's what I'll say. It's not that I don't think that U.S. manufacturing going overseas has been a problem. I do. But I want it to be properly understood. So the argument that you just made is one I completely agree with, right? It's the manipulation of currencies and what happens when you're the world's reserve currency and you got a Federal Reserve and a fiat currency. That I all agree with. I think that's all like Austrian school approved. I just want to make sure that people don't learn the wrong lesson from that. And that is not, international trade is not a bad thing. International trade is a very, very good thing. The question we should be asking ourselves is, why is American manufacturing moving overseas? Because some American manufacturing moving overseas actually makes sense. Like, for instance, some of the textile industry, right? The other problem, though, is that instead of looking at domestic policy, which actually makes it more advantageous, because think about this for a second. You're going to pick up you're going to take a plant. You're going to move it away from where your primary, like, let's say, customer base is. Not to say that America is the only customer base for the products, but let's just, again, you're going to put it overseas. You're going to have to deal with international governments, international tax laws, potentially currency exchanges, all these other factors. It might be not as be a stable a government, or you have a place like China where, gosh, who knows? They might steal your patents. They might, you have to deal with all those considerations. Think about what sort of cost benefit you have to get in order to justify all those additional expenses and risks. And that's the part where we need to start looking at our own domestic tax and regulatory laws. And so as long as we should acknowledge that competitive advantage exists, but competitive advantage should not be because of regulatory and tax environments. It should be because the natural organic development of an economy. And so I agree with J.D. Vance that we have a massive problem with U.S. manufacturing going overseas, or a lot of it. But what I desperately want us to understand is that so much of that is a result of our own domestic regulatory and tax environments. Stop making it difficult to manufacture in the United States, and more people, to include more people across the globe, will manufacture in the United States. And that doesn't come from the government playing this little game where it's like, okay, if you move your company over here, we'll give you all these tax. No, low taxes, stable government, stable regulatory environment that actually makes sense, right? Don't sit there and have the NLRB getting involved in every single labor dispute, right? If you have that, people will want to manufacture within the United States. So I just want people to understand that there are certain economic principles that they shouldn't be left or right. They're just economic principles. It's just reality. Competitive advantage is a thing. You just never want to take yourself out of competition because you have such a Byzantine system of taxes and regulations that it makes no sense to do certain things within the United States.
We're just in a really tough spot right now, because historically Republicans didn't perform well in large parts of the Rust Belt because they didn't have an answer to this issue other than saying, I'm against tariffs.
Yeah.
And then we'd lose Michigan in a landslide. We'd lose Wisconsin. We'd lose Pennsylvania. Sometimes we'd lose Ohio even. The good news is that, we're improving in this area, and we need to, in order to remain competitive nationwide. And I understand that, we disagree with Trump's rhetoric about tariffs, but it's not simply enough to just say, I disagree with Trump on tariffs. That's not going to win us Michigan.
Yeah. We have to give a better alternative.
We have to give a better alternative, which is why I keep trying to harp on on the status of the world reserve currency and how our fiat system has actually crippled the Rust Belt. Because when we articulate it from that perspective and then we offer an alternative and say we need to address the fact that our fiat system, our monetary system is broken and that's hurting you, and we need to address the typical things that Republicans have always talked about, tax and regulatory streamlining. I don't think it's enough to just use the old school argument from the 90s that Republicans would make, which is I support free trade, but I also support cutting taxes and regulations. That message does not resonate with the type of voters that we desperately need to win over in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan. But it might resonate with those type of voters if we simply say the system has been rigged against us going all the way back to 1971.
Yes.
And that is the reason the factories are closing up shop. And I believe in sound money, which will bring manufacturing back home.
And we can start getting those arguments out into the space. Now we need to move to the next.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll finish with this. Totally agree with everything you said. What I don't want is for us to adopt bad economic policy because it's politically popular. That's what I want to try to avoid. As long as we're talking good economic policy and a better way to talk about it and discuss it and get those ideas out there, I'm absolutely on board. I just don't want to move into this realm where we honestly believe that we honestly believe that making goods more expensive for the American people is the way to actually gain prosperity. I don't think that's accurate.
No.
All right.
Next one.
Next clip.
I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
And he does that wide-eyed thing that like usually psychopaths only do. He just like opens his eyes as hard as he can.
I will tell you right now, look, I disagree with that. He did a good job. When you look at what his base wants to see, and when you look at the people that were like just horribly insane. And again, everyone in the chats, before you start lighting me up, what I'm talking about here is from a tactical political standpoint. What he did was address something that for both his base and a certain degree of potential swing voters is going to be impactful. And again, part of the reason why I'm bringing up this clip is because I don't want to just sit there and make this I want to analyze the debate. And there's a lot of people that if you can conjure up enough imagery around January 6th, that's going to potentially sway them on election day. And he didn't do again, from a politically tactical standpoint, he didn't do a bad job when he made that statement.
I don't want to hear a single word from any elected Democrat about our oath of office. These people have betrayed their oaths of office. They've betrayed the Constitution. They've betrayed the American people. They support a host of policies that are detrimental to the United States and the people that live here. They're trying to import millions of people who don't share our values, don't want to share our values, and simply want to replace American workers. They want to replace American culture. They want to rewrite American history. These people are the enemy, and I don't want to hear a single word from Tim Walz or Kamala Harris or any other Democrat about our oath to office. They don't believe in any oaths to anything.
Well, what he's trying to do is get those people that are in the middle.
Yeah.
I know. He wants those moderates who he could pull his way to be like, look, he's a dangerous man. Let's be careful, guys. And he's got this sense of urgency in how he's looking, and he's just like, oh, the sky is gonna fall if you guys just don't do what you need to do. You gotta vote for Kamala.
Well, but he wasn't unhinged. Okay, so here's what I want you to do.
He comes off unhinged to me. I mean, like every time I see a clip of Walz, he reminds me of Howard Dean and the screaming.
I don't think he came across unhinged.
Here's what I want. Stop analyzing it from the frustration standpoint of what he actually said and our overall frustration with the left in this country, and now just analyze it as a political analyst.
Yeah.
How was that?
No. He said the right thing in order to try to sway the handful of swing voters that are there.
And he used his body language and his face to convey a sense of urgency.
Yeah, urgency and genuine concern. Now, again, I don't think it's genuine,
I
but
don't
that's
think anything about this guy's genuine.
again,
But
guys, if you're not able to take off the hat for a second and say,
no, I can, and
Okay.
that's the.
if I'm looking at it just as a clip, sure. But when you've watched everything else and how many lies he's been caught in, and he makes the same face when he's caught in a lie, it's like you're a deceptive man.
Nick.
And so I don't think any of this is happening in a vacuum. And for people just to take one little clip and be like, well, he makes a good point. Well, you need to look at everything else.
Well,
This
I
guy
don't-
is totally dishonest.
I don't disagree that you need to look at everything else. I've also been involved for politics a little while. And the reason why I brought this up is this is from Mother Jones. Mother Jones is like straight up leftist, claptrap, right? These are the clip. We've done a lot of clips that our side is putting out. I'm doing a clip that their side is putting out.
I'm glad that you did it. Nick, I think that you've known me long enough to know that I can look at things objectively. Obviously, nobody can look at things entirely objectively. There is no veil of ignorance. Sorry, John Rawls. But, I can look at things relatively objectively and say, no, that he said what he needed to say to get his base excited and to sway swing voters that care about this issue. And there are voters that care about this issue. I have no doubt that there are. It's just frustrating to me from my standpoint, looking at the world the way that I look at it, and I hear people talk about our oaths to office or our oaths to the Constitution. And I want to be like, you have no respect for the Constitution and no respect for the office at all because you don't respect any limiting principles. Your ideology demands that you don't respect any limiting principles. You don't even respect the laws of biology and physics, let alone words written on a piece of paper by guys 200 years ago.
Yeah.
The other point that really upsets me, and we were getting at this before we started filming, is I am so sick and tired of hearing Republicans say Democrats are the real threat to democracy. When I hear Democrats say things like Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, I want to be like, I wish he was. I wish that Donald Trump, Lord, please give me the Donald Trump that libs are afraid of. I want that Donald Trump.
Oh my
Please
God.
give him to me.
Can you please caveat that with
I'll caveat it
explain.
with you are a fool, and I'm saying you rhetorically. You are a fool if you believe that we can fight back against communism with democracy. Democracy is a road to communism. It is not a tool to fight back against communism.
Wait a second. This is also the differentiation between a constitutional republic, which uses certain democratic processes, versus what we might describe as direct democracy. And again, we've expressed this so much. I think we've done a fairly good job of differentiating between the two, right? We don't have a problem with people voting for representatives. I do have a problem. I have two major problems with the left trying to categorize the United States as a democracy. My first problem with it is that it is horribly inaccurate. Again, we are a constitutional republic with democratic processes for certain things, and that's not a semantic. That is a very important component. The other major problem I have with it is that the reason why there's so much emphasis on democracy is because they really do want a world for which everything is voted on. There's nothing safe from the state. And the moral legitimacy for everything they want to do is found in, did they get the most votes? And that is a horrible way. You are not a genuinely free society by being a democracy. You're a genuinely free society when people are largely free and able to live their lives the way they want and actually have to pay the prices for their own actions or reap the benefits from their actions. But if that can be constantly perverted by an intrusive government that can either come in and give or take away based off of whatever the simple majority has decided, don't tell me that's a free country. It's just a tyranny of the majority.
It's even worse than that. It is an eradication of quality. It's the reign of quantity over quality. When you argue for universalizing, leveling democracy, what you're saying is that the opinion of everybody is equal. Yeah. But people are not equal. People have talents. There's certain things that I can do that other people can't do, and there's certain things that other people can do that I can't do. And that applies to the realm of politics as well. There are people that are capable of making difficult decisions, and there are people that are utterly incapable of understanding the consequences of the actions that they're advocating for. And I want a political system that rewards and incentivizes political decision making to be in the hands of people that A, pay a price for being wrong, B, have stake in the system, and C, know what the hell they're actually doing. And what we currently have right now is a political system that is incentivized to place decision-making in the hands of whoever can just whip the masses into a frenzy in order to get 51% of the vote and gaslight people into voting blue no matter who. Again, this is why I
Fair
said
critique.
No, I think
and
that's
a few episodes ago that, like, the left 20 years ago, they didn't understand what transing kids meant. The average Democrat in office in Congress or in the state legislature in Virginia in 2000 had no idea what this issue is, and now everybody's on board with it. Why? They're only on board with it because it's a means to an end. It is a self-licking ice cream cone. The left has to constantly invent new moral crises in order to justify their hold on power because they believe in the leveling effect that is democracy. So anyway, that's a whole nother discussion for another day.
Can I go back to the clip just real quick? That clip was talking about basically January 6th.
Yeah.
He's trying to convey a sense of urgency, and everybody's so scared of Donald Trump, you guys, because of January 6th. And the left has repeatedly for the last almost 4 years just tried to milk January 6th for everything it was worth. I mean, you would have thought genocide happened on January 6th. The only person that was actually killed by another person on January 6th was the gal on the side of the protest by one of the police officers inside, or was it Capitol Police inside the congressional building. That was the only person killed. The only other medical emergency that happened was a police officer who had, I think, a cardiac problem. And so we're talking about this as if it was just mass, decimation of human beings, human life. And it wasn't. It was buildings. And so I want to go back to just recently this morning, I read an article about an MSNBC host was absolutely mortified to find out that one of the star witnesses in the January 6th trials against Trump, his name is Gordon Sondland. He had served as ambassador to the EU, and he became a star witness against Trump in his first impeachment trial. And he had talked about how he would never vote for Trump because he was like a threat to democracy, right?
And January 6th was like...
And January 6th was the reason he could not vote for Trump. And this was a star witness against Trump. And now the MSNBC guy, can't remember his name, said, do you stand by that still? And he said, no, I do not stand by it. I'll tell you why. I've lived now for 4 years under the Biden-Harris policies, and I have to say that those policies are not only becoming an existential threat to our country's way of life, but our allies as well. And the host absolutely lost his mind and started shouting over him and saying, you said it was a no for you after January 6th. And here we are right now, and you're saying it's a yes for you. And he said, it is a yes for me. It is an absolute yes for me. That is how badly the Biden-Harris team have prosecuted their job. But the whole point you seem to be making was that January 6th and that kind of attack on democracy is bigger than any policy. That was the response. I am seeing so many attacks on democracy that eclipse January 6th. And so just to have their own, like, January 6th was their baby. They were so happy that happened. And I mean, they've just loved every second of it. And they have. Like, every single time we have a problem with anything, they're like that meme that's like, do violence, please do violence. And we don't do violence. In fact, violence was done to our side on that day. Just people having a riot, basically. We're not the side that riots. So the minute that our side gets out of hand and does riot, the left just eats it up. They're so excited about it. And so to have somebody that was a star witness against Trump flip on this position and say Kamala Harris and Walz are way worse of an option than Trump, to me, that's significant.
Well, I think it... I think it goes that they overplayed their hand, because as more information came out, I think in part they were expecting to completely control the process for the January 6th investigations. And so they were very, very selective on what information was allowed to get out, what witnesses were allowed to testify. And then the moment the Republicans took the House, all of a sudden, there was more testimony. And it wasn't that anybody was coming out going, oh, no, actually, it turns out January 6th was a good thing, right? Nobody was saying that. But they were able to reveal that there were major problems, that some of it laid at the feet of Nancy Pelosi. When Trump is saying, let's bring in additional law enforcement and National Guard in order to ensure the safety of everybody, and they refuse it, when you have people going into the Capitol initially, not necessarily doing anything wrong and being let in, when you have what it appeared to be a very, very delayed response, all that starts begging questions, right? Not to mention the fact that when you have people that, 3 years later are being rolled up with tactical teams from the FBI, not because they went into the Capitol, but because some surveillance camera showed them, running outside the Capitol. There's some real problems here. And this is where it just goes to show that they saw an opportunity here. And this is also where it's important to understand Saul Alinsky. It's important to understand the rules for radicals, because one of the things he emphasizes there is that their action is about our reaction. Right, it's about doing something that appeals to either the right's anger or disgust, and then gets a reaction which they're able to capitalize on. And January 6th provided that. And so again, January 6th it was a big problem, right? It was horrible for a number of reasons. But it certainly wasn't what the left, I think, tried to make it out to be, is the greatest attempt at an insurgency takeover of the insurrection of the government. Like, oh, come on. All right, let's go to we got like one more clip. Let's do the immigration clip, and then we got to talk about this clip that Wolst did on the
You're gonna have to tell me which one's the immigration.
The immigration one is on the thing. It's you got it up there.
Is this it?
Yeah, do that one. Okay. Yeah.
So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember, when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Governor.
All right.
That was pretty good.
I thought it was really good because, again, you talk about family separation, the Department of Homeland Security losing track of 320,000 children. And it's also this, again, the intellectual dishonesty of the fact that separating minors from adults, right? Because they keep talking about family separation. When an adult comes over the border with a child, that could be a family. It could be human trafficking. It could be drug trafficking. It could be any number of things, right? But when you set up an incentive structure with things like DACA and whatnot, where you're incentivizing a particular type of illegal immigration, I think it's important to understand that you don't get to just rightly assume that, oh yeah, they must be a family. Because we know of cases where the same children are getting used to cross the border multiple times for very, very criminal and illegal reasons outside of just immigration law.
Yeah, they're done using the child, so they hand them off to the next person that needs to get across with the child.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand, and this is something that Tom Holland, who was head of immigration under Trump, he used to point out. Holman. He said, if I were to pull you over right now, for an illegal act, I wouldn't put you and your child in the same facility. There would be separate, and we would verify things. And instead, this is being treated as something that like Trump manufactured out of thin air. No, it's actually been fairly typical process. It was something that was done under the Obama administration. In fact, a lot of the pictures the press were using to hammer Trump were pictures from the Obama administration. But the far bigger issue here is the reason why you have the whole separation of families issue is because you have a massive border crisis. You were talking about second and third order effects of the primary problem, but you don't want to do anything about the primary problem. Fix the primary problem. This is the old adage that if my basement is flooding because a pipe broke, I don't sit around going around, okay, what do I do about all this? The first thing I do is I stop the flooding, and then we worry about the water inside the house, right? And then what he said was perfectly reasonable. It's like, what are we going to do? Well, look, we're not going to deploy the 82nd Airborne Division all over the country to start knocking on doors of anybody that looks a certain way. We're going to go into our prison system, and we're going to say, okay, how many people are here in the country illegally? Okay, as soon as you're done with your sentence, you get deported. How many people do we have in the country that have a criminal record that are potentially still here? All right, well, when you get picked up again, you get deported. I'm sorry, like I've sat there and actually helped immigrants in this country. I helped a woman out. She was brought over here when she was 2. Okay? Wasn't her fault. She was brought over here with 2, but she was here illegally. She lived here her entire life, got married, had 4 kids. Biden was going to deport her. We're like, this is where you're going to put I think most reasonable Americans can look at that and say, okay, look, I don't like how all this happened, but I understand that we're dealing with the situation as it is right now. You're married to an American citizen. You have 4 children that are American citizens. We're probably not going to prioritize you for deportation. Well, the Biden administration did. Why? Because she was easy to find. Not to mention the fact that it creates a narrative. Oh, we have to enforce this law. I guess we're going to have to go. How many MS-13 people in jail did you pass up to target a woman that's married to an American citizen with 4 kids? I even had I was working with somebody on this because she wasn't my constituent. And it's like, well, Nick, do you see the problem now? I'm like, do you see the problem on the completely illegitimate or the completely absurd enforcement of the law over here, while the complete ignoring of the law over here? And oh, by the way, if you would fix this here, you wouldn't be dealing with this here.
I wish that Vance had kind of turned the script on the enemy. Well, I'm going to keep calling the moderators that because what he should have, I'm not saying that he did a bad job, but what I think he should have said is that, Megan or whoever the name of the moderator was, you know what the real family separation crisis that I'm worried about right now is when Laken Riley was killed by an illegal immigrant in Georgia when she was attending college. Yeah. That family separated and will always now be separated. Mm-hmm. And Biden's administration, Harris's administration, let's be honest, it is Harris's administration at this point, they're not worried about the separation of American families. They're worried about the separation of people who should have never entered this country illegally to begin with. Yeah. In terms of prioritization of where my concern is, where my emotions are, it is towards the families of the hundreds and at this point thousands of American families across this entire country that have had members of their family that have been raped, that have been murdered, that have been brutalized, that have been burglary, stolen from, burglary, theft, assault, battery, all of this stuff, Grand Theft Auto, and in the worst cases, murder at the hands of illegal immigrants who have walked into this country because you allowed it to happen. Mm-hmm. Oh, that is the messaging that I'm waiting for Republicans to start running with, which is not taking the bait, not allowing them to frame this issue about some sort of compassionate issue. Where is the compassion for Americans? This is something that Vance actually brought up in his acceptance speech at the RNC convention, and then you and I actually got into an argument a little bit about this because he was attacking the idea that the United States is basically the civic nationalist interpretation of the United States, that the United States is an idea. And you and I actually got a little bit into a debate on this, but I think we actually found some common ground. Look, the United States should exist like any other country for the benefit of American citizens.
Yes.
If it does not exist for the benefit of me, then there is no place on earth that I can go to, because I'm not a citizen of France or Russia or China or the United Kingdom. I'm a citizen of this country. And if the policies of this country are not oriented to the benefit of me as a citizen of this country, but instead it's oriented to the benefit of anybody that can just walk into the country, or apparently press an app on a phone and have somebody fly them into this country, then at that point, we don't have a country anymore. We have an economic zone, and economic zones are great. Free trade zones are great. I love free trade.
Sure.
But we don't have a nation. I have nothing to turn to. I have no shared sense of community or culture or history to appeal to, because I can't go to Europe and say this is my country. I'm not ethnically, if you go far enough back, I'm European in the sense that hundreds of years ago my ancestors came from some European countries, but I'm an American. I can't. There's no other place on this planet for me other than the United States. And what we have right now is an administration that is captivated by an ideology that holds more compassion and more empathy and more regard for people that aren't Americans and that are from other parts of the world and want to enter into this country illegally than they do to the American people that were born here, raised here, had family that have been living here for generations or centuries. And I'm just waiting for a politician to speak to that rather than simply.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I do believe that America, there is a component of it that is an idea, and I think that's important, but it's also a place. And the place is important too. Because like you said before, the reason why nations are set up is to provide a sense of protection and well-being for a people. Now, the United States has been incredibly generous in the sense that we don't define your Americanness based off of your ethnicity. But we do define it by some degree of loyalty to the idea. Otherwise, what's the point? Like all of these, like every other country on the earth. And what's funny is the left knows it. The left understands it. Because the left absolutely believes that other countries and other cultures should be able to protect their cultures and protect their people and serve those people. It's only when it comes to us that all of a sudden, no, not really. No, they have a larger philosophical, ideological goal in mind, and insofar as you're in line with that or beneficial to it, well then, yes, we'll protect you and advance you and subsidize you and whatever else. And insofar as you're not, the fact that you're an American citizen, well, that doesn't matter. Are you useful to the ideology or not? And so I don't disagree with that. All right, we got one more clip that we're going to do, and then we've got an article that we've got to show you.
Is this at the...
Yeah, do this one because this was just brutal.
You have to watch the whole thing, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, you do. All right.
Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service.
He's proud of that service.
I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect.
See,
and I'm a
that look
knucklehead
again,
at
guys.
times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric.
Clearly.
But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID, and I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community, and then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier, or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this, so I will just
simple answer.
Pause. So we were
in.
That was so painful.
Hong Kong and
the 3-second answer at the end was the one that was required. But I love that JD Vance does this like little look over to the camera. He looks like just like Jim Halpert from The Office.
He's looking at him like, come on, guys.
It would have helped him if he just simply said, "I just misspoke. I got the dates wrong. The point is," and then he could have gotten into.
Yeah. But he does this a lot.
But the problem is that he went around talking about being there at Tiananmen Square.
Oh, did he say he was?
Said he was there at
Yes.
Tiananmen Square. So this wasn't a misspeak. You came up with
that would have been news because
he came up with a
no
story.
American was at Tiananmen
No,
Square.
he was coming up with a story to give himself credibility in the eyes of whoever he was speaking to, saying, "Well, I was there." It was an appeal to authority because he was there.
That was kind of the point. The CCP did
now
not
he
allow
says
anyone to be there.
And now he says, "Oh, I misspoke."
Well, so it's not
This
only
is
that.
why we don't believe this guy.
He's done a lot of this stuff. Like I was a sergeant major. You were an acting sergeant major. I carried weapons.
To war?
I carried weapons in war. No, you didn't. Like he keeps having these episodes where they're trying to create an image. But I want to. Okay,
He said that he also during this debate said that his son witnessed.
Check Slack.
His son witnessed a shooting at a community center. Well, fact check, turns out his son was inside. This shooting happened outside. His son did not witness it.
Well,
he just happened to be in the vicinity.
Look, I will give some grace to something like that.
I won't. At this point, he's lied about so much stuff.
Okay, anyways,
but he also said that he was friends with shooters.
School shooters.
Oh yeah, he's made friends with school shooters.
So listen. This is what. As soon as I heard this is what I thought of right here. So go ahead and do this. I just realized
this
is the Michael Scott. You got to do that.
Yeah.
Here's the Tim Waltz, Michael Scott.
David, here it is. My philosophy is basically this, and this is something that I live by, and I always have, and I always will. Don't ever, for any reason, do anything to anyone for any reason, ever, no matter what, no matter where or who you are with or where you are going or where you've been, ever, for any reason whatsoever. Sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going.
Pause.
Oh, so he's me. He's me.
That was clearly Tim Walz's debate prep for this.
Somebody mentioned that, debate prep, they rehearse, they practice, they do different things. But when you're telling the truth, debate prep isn't that hard because you really believe in these things. You know it to be true. And when you've actually experienced real things, you know what's true and what's not true. And really, then all you have to figure out is the delivery. How am I going to deliver these things? How am I going to bring back to mind certain things, when I need to? But when you have to deal with landmines and go, I better not say this true thing. I better sidestep it over here. And so you're having to figure out how to sidestep all of these things that you have accidentally misspoken on before. That's when debate prep is incredibly important.
Yeah. Okay, last link in there. This is the real issue, people. This is the real issue. And so we're gonna close up today with our analysis of, I think, what the real problem is. It's not this one, by the way.
Oh.
It's not this one either.
The article.
It's look in the outline. Look in the outline we gave you. Look in the outline we gave you, Christian.
It's not my fault that you told me to pull up something from The Office and then I lost it.
We're firing Christian. As soon as
All
right,
I this was the thing that I was hinting at earlier. We get to talk about it now.
Let's get down to brass tacks.
No, it's your fault, Nick.
Oh, is that not the one? Okay, then type it in. You know what it is.
Yeah,
You know what it's
yeah.
about. All right, it is my fault. We'll be firing me immediately following the show. But Tina spotted this.
Is this it?
This article right here.
Is it from? Is
no,
it the
no,
one
no.
from
Go
Politico?
up. I want
is
this
from
one.
Politico,
But I want,
but-
Politico's the actual article. So if you want to do that, yes, JD
yeah,
Vance's.
I just want to pull up directly the one from Politico.
Yes.
Okay.
Scroll up.
Sorry.
Gosh dang. Yes, JD Vance's beard matters. Here's why. Now, look, at first I was like, oh, Politico finally coming on board with why the beards are important. I need to be able to read it, Christian.
No.
All right, there we go. Beards are seemingly ubiquitous in pop culture and public life, though they certainly are right here with Christian and myself, not to mention Nate over there running all the commands. From sports stars to country singers to Hollywood actors, facial hair has made a noticeable comeback in recent years, except in politics. It's been more than a century since a sitting president or vice president sported a beard, and nearly 80 years since a candidate for the White House had any facial hair whatsoever. Even in Congress, those with beards remain few and far between. Enter Republican presidential nominee J.D. Vance. The Ohio politician's full beard is so novel on a presidential ticket that has been the subject of a disproportionate amount of the chatter surrounding his selection. Pundits have speculated as whether it would ultimately be a deal breaker for Donald Trump, whose well-known aversion to facial hair reportedly doomed some potential picks for his first-term cabinet. Trump's preferences mirror the long-standing societal stereotypes, which is part of why most politicians have avoided facial hair in recent decades. For most of the 20th century in the United States, beards were seen as an unprofessional and unhygienic. More recent research has shown that voters perceive facial hair as deeply masculine, which can come with both positive connotations like competence and negative ones like aggression and less support of feminist issues.
No, those are two positive things.
Okay, by sporting a beard, Vance is on the cutting edge of a generational shift in facial hairstyles. But he's also in uncharted, potentially tricky territory. He and by extension, Trump's campaign are betting that voters will see his facial hair as a sign of Vance as the rugged everyman, a young Abraham Lincoln. As Trump said earlier this month, rather than giving off undertones of an untrustworthy aggressor. He's either the tip of the iceberg or a very unusual aberration. It depends on whether people follow suit. Christopher Oldston Moore, the author of Beards and Men, The Revealing History of Facial Hair, told me, I've always said that politics is going to be the top indicator of whether we're going to be in the new beard era or not, whether we're looking at the return of beards in a big way across the board. Can you believe Politico has already dedicated this much time to this issue?
Yeah.
It hasn't always been this way. Oh my gosh, this is just too much. I can't even keep up this thing. But the era of plentiful beard, blah, blah, blah. Go down. I'm getting bored now.
Oh, there's tough.
Keep going
what
down.
a beard.
Okay. There's been a linkage between clean shavenness and several important masculine qualities that were valued in the 20th century, even up to the present. Said Oldstone Moore, there was a strong association of shaving with regularity, efficiency, cooperation, reliability, all the kinds of things that corporations wanted. Those perceptions have long lingered for decades. Robert Stutzman, a California-based Republican political consultant, said he had been required to ditch his goatee when he got a job as a spokesperson for then California Attorney General Dan Lundgren in the 1990s. I remember Dan. Scroll down some more. Here's what this really comes down to. Ready? Okay. Of those surveyed, 52% of men and 49% of women said they would vote for the candidate with facial hair, a figure that could make a difference in a close election, because that's definitely what people choose. Candidates, especially those needing to shore up support from female voters, should shave away all facial hair, the researchers wrote at the time. Go in and scroll down.
And this is a study from the University of Oklahoma, I believe.
Yeah.
Is what it says up there.
Yeah.
Oklahoma State University.
Yeah.
Yeah, this all just goes toward the fact that women vote based on looks so much. And it's absolutely embarrassing.
Yeah.
He has kind eyes. Oh, he has a beard. The beard really looks like toxically masculine. He looks like maybe he would be aggressive, and I'm scared of that. And, ultimately, this is partly because we have so many women, most of the women that are voting age are on birth control now, which makes them hate masculinity.
Yeah. I think you can make the case that there's some populism to it, said Stutzman, adding that a beard remains somewhat inherently, if not anti-authority, at least anti-historical conventions. More than just serving as a tangible sign of Vance's political transformation, political observers say it's also a sign of the generational shift underway in politics. As more millennials enter elected office, beards are becoming more common and more accepted, even in politics. There's not a single millennial out there who would find the question of whether a politician of facial hair to be relevant, said Republican consultant Brad Todd. Is the stigma against beards subsiding? I think it's completely gone, he said, due in large part to the silent generation moving out of politics. If Vance does break the so-called beard barrier and put facial hair back in the White House, it might not be the last aesthetic trend millennials normalize as they take on an increasingly influential role in politics. Todd's prediction for the next step is going to be, of course, very visible tattoos.
I hope that we don't get that one, but
Very visible tattoos.
yeah, I hope that we don't get that one. But I will say to the beard
No,
thing.
I want the very visible tattoos. I want Nick to get a tattoo that like starts here and comes down past the elbow just a little bit.
No,
and goes
no.
across his chest so that you'll see it.
The beard
I like
thing,
it.
I'm a fan, not just because I have one, but because, see, like when I think of beards, I think of Plato's Philosopher King, right? Like, I mean, the ancient Greek philosophers, most of them wore beards. Plato and Aristotle, Heraclitus, Plotinus. Marcus Aurelius, I believe, wore a beard. There was a time in Roman history where beards were considered barbaric because the Romans were clean shaven, but there were later Roman leaders that started popularizing beards because they were admirers of Greek philosophy.
Yeah.
And so like when I think of beards, I don't think of like, unkept, whatever. I think of, I don't know. I think back to the type of leaders that we really need to be having, which are like the philosopher kings.
Well, the
that Plato
manosphere,
talks
the
about.
manosphere loves beards.
Well, here's where we're going to go down. We're going to end this now because this has been a super long
Yeah, it
podcast.
has.
But hey, listen, you guys have all stuck with us. We've had over 1,000 people watching pretty much the entire time. So thank you very much. I hope we got to all of the questions that you had and even just some other ones maybe you were thinking of. But as you can see, to the people that have actually in the Super Chats asked me to run for president before, I thought the beard might have to go, but now that I know it's not, maybe I'll throw my hat. No, I am not doing that.
Just keep the lip trimmed.
Look, here's
That's
what it
the
goes
big
down
one.
to. Like, it's so much stupidity with respect to how we elect leaders and some of the things that are supposed to matter. But I hope we've done a good overview right now. I think it is important to understand that, again, going back to kind of the original question that we asked, is this the most important election of our lifetime? I will say this. I do think you have probably the most significant contrast in the candidates that you've had probably in a long time. Because whereas you could call Hillary Clinton liberal and whatnot, and she certainly was, or she was certainly leftist, there was still kind of this I don't know, international order or whatnot that she seemed to be pretty connected to. And I wouldn't be surprised if Harris is as well, but I do think I see the Democratic Party going off in a leftist direction that is a departure even from what it was 20 years ago. And so there's no question that I think Kamala Harris would go as far to the left as she thought necessary during her presidency. Trump and Vance, on the other hand, because Trump could have picked a different VP candidate. I honestly think he picked one that thought could be a successor. I might be wrong, but I think that's what he did. And so what that means is that if that is the case, then we're actually looking at a potentially pretty long fight against what you might call certain elements of kind of the post-World War II international order. You're definitely looking at a fight against an unelected federal bureaucracy, which I believe has to be fought if we're going to save the country. And so that contrast is significant. And that in and of itself makes this election cycle very different. But then when you also look at all the other considerations, when you look at things like inflation and the problem with our fiat currency and the Federal Reserve System, when you look at what is going on from a conflict standpoint, whether it be major powers with nuclear weapons engaged in pretty significant land wars, issues going on within the Middle East, when you look at some of the economic decisions that we're going to have to make going forward, I'm ready to say it. I think this is the most important election cycle of our life. What I don't want people to confuse that with is to say that if we get the result we want out of this election cycle, then we will therefore get all the results we want. That's not the case. This actually requires people to not only look at things differently with respect to how we look at the people that might represent us in Congress or the presidency. or even the role of government specifically. It also looks, I think, more and more at how we look at our state governments. And even more importantly, how we look at our own families and our own decisions that we make, whether those be economically. This is one of the reasons why we talk about intentional community. When you have a significant portion of the population that does not want the same thing. And I don't believe that every Democrat falls within that categorization. But I do believe that their leadership in Congress does. I'm seeing them want something that, quite frankly, I don't think bears a great deal of resemblance to the core founding principles of the United States, namely individual liberty, personal responsibility, free market economics, property rights. I don't think the left wants that. I think the left thinks a lot of that is inherently evil. And so I believe that they are doing the Lord's work by trying to undo it and replace it with something else that they think will bring about greater equity. And the problem with that is that if we could agree to disagree and we could live our lives the way they wanted and they can live their lives the way they wanted, well, then maybe we could peacefully coexist and we could focus about issues that unify us. Maybe we could talk more about arts and entertainment, or we could talk about sporting events, or whatever it was that doesn't normally bring up the same level of hostility, although unfortunately that's starting to change as well. But that's not where we're at right now. And when somebody vehemently disagrees with your worldview and is willing to use the government in order to compel you to do what they want, compel you to raise your kids the way they think you should, educate your kids the way they think you should, run your business the way they think you should, even when it goes against what you might consider to be deeply held moral convictions, and which fall way outside of what we might have ever considered to be the proper role of government, well, then you're either going to win that fight or you're going to be dominated. So I've had people before say, we think you guys are getting a little bit too divisive. Let me just point something out. Me pointing out a reality that you think is divisive is not me being divisive. The reality is divisive. And it has to be pointed out because we're going to have to come up with a response to it. And I want that response to be peaceful. I want it to be peacefully and civilly adjudicated as much as possible. But by the same token, I'm not living under certain rules or circumstances which I think violate those core fundamental principles. And so I do think it's important for people to develop strong capabilities, to develop strong networks, so that they can feel secure and then hopefully save our country through those peaceful and civil means, because that is the ideal. That's what we want, and that's what I'm striving for. But this election matters. And if you're watching this, chances are you are the person within your family or friend group that is a little bit more politically in tune. There's a lot of people that you know that are paying attention and probably plan to vote, have every intention of voting, but you'll be shocked by how many of them won't, simply because they got caught up with something else, and why does their vote matter anyways? You're going to have other people that think, well, why should I even bother voting when the other side cheats? And I'm going to say that I'm hoping that you're the person that's going to talk to them and say, look, I understand the frustrations, or maybe I understand the concerns, but you really need to. Because whether you care about politics or not, I promise you, the people that are running for office, they're going to use politics to impact you in ways that we probably haven't seen for some time in this country. And so if you don't participate, you might not be able to stop it from happening, but if you don't participate, you guarantee that it will happen. And so that's what I would ask. Go out there, talk to those friends, convince them to vote, however they need to, right? Drive to the polls, absentee, whatever it is. Convince them to do it, because I really do think it's going to matter this time more significantly than it has for some time. And then after you're done doing that, also focus on all of those other things that make life better. Be the sort of husband, be the sort of wife, be the sort of mother, be the sort of father, where you're raising your kids in an environment to actually share those values, to be able to fight for them intellectually, to truly believe in them. And if we do that, I think we save the country. And I think we save it peacefully. Once again, thank you very much for joining. Thank you for all of your questions. Also, please consider joining the Circle Chat. And one more time, Tuttle Twins. Speaking of educating your children wisely and effectively, Tuttle Twins book series right now, I think it's 60% off if you go to the link in my description. So that's quite a deal. You'll also really enjoy the cartoons as well. Like I said, they're funny, they're appropriate, and they're going to teach some good principles out there. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next episode.